Chapter 2237. When we arrive at the Dongwang realm, we were immediately brought to the Kunlun Sea by Lady Su, who had been waiting for a long time. Coincidentally, Brother Zine was calling for reinforcements, and because Senior Tianyong sensed that our Tao presence was complete, he brought us to the Sword World. Zhan Wu then recounted everything that happened after Qin Hao left the Sword World. Tianyong God moved the sea and reclaimed the land, set up a stone tablet to demarcate the boundaries. This matter was spread across the Yuan Huang heavens and became a taboo to the worlds. The upper extremity was so strong, but before Tianyong's godly aura, it was as weak as a toddler. How would the gods dare to disrespect it? Especially the stronger the celestial cultivation base, the greater the fear. For example, the deity king factions. Zhan Wu couldn't figure it out. Tianyong's primordial chaos, Tao, might wasn't weak, but he was at most a quasi-deity king. There was still a distance between him and a true deity king. In the eyes of an innate deity king, he should be even more unworthy. Yet, the reality was the exact opposite. The deity kings placed great importance on Tianyong, and that feeling was not only because of Tianyong's strength, but also because there were secrets hidden behind it. As long as an innate deity king touched Tianyong, a calamity would be triggered. The Tianzhao army retreated, and from then on, no one dared to attack the Sword World anymore. Zhan Wu also returned to the war god race's ancestral ground and met with the race's supreme grand ancestor, the War God King. At the moment he declared his decision, the War God King sent a deity king's army back to the Sword World and commanded by Zhan Meng. Zhan Meng was not an ordinary divine general. His brother, Zhan Jiuqian, was an innate life form that descended into the world at the same time as the deity kings. He awakened his psyche from the chaos, but the primordial chaos Tao that nurtured him was much weaker than before. However, Zhan Jiuqian was the strongest god under the War God King. The War God race sent Zhan Jiuqian's brother here, and from this, one could see how much importance they placed on Zhan Wu. Innate deity kings races were already very few in number. The War God race, Tianzhao race, Yunjia Jade race, and the others were all the same. Unless the divine king created a spirit and nurtured a divine prince, there would be no such thing as a branch or a direct line of descent. All of them would belong to the direct line of descent of the divine king, and there would be no distinction of seniority. When Zhan Wu had an immortal grade heavenly wheel and was banished from the immemorial realm by the Tianzhao clan, the war god Monarch had specially given him a treasure armor. Today, Zhan Wu had returned with a perfect great Tao and a perfect heavenly wheel. This attracted even more attention from the god of war. Our ancestor god brigade is here, and with Senior Tianyong's divine might, no one in the myriad of worlds can bully the Sword World, and no one dares to bully the Sword World. Zhan Wu's temperament was naturally filled with a sense of bravery and ruthlessness. His words always gave people close to him a sense of strength, making them feel very safe. All these years, the Sword Realm had long regarded Zhan Wu as an indispensable part of sword cultivation. Under his guidance, the Sword Realm had become increasingly powerful. Currently, the surrounding divine realms had begun to implement divine realms teleportation, gradually moving further and further away from the desolate land. They had the intention to leave the area radiated by the Sword Realm's radiance. Qin Hao nodded. He had heard about this before coming here, and he had experienced it firsthand in the Mirage. The Sword World was no longer the Sword World that was struggling under the attacks of the Tianzhao army. Just like the Dongwang realm that was destroyed by Zhan Wu, if the other divine realms dared to have thoughts of invading the Sword World, they would be the next divine realm to disappear. You all continue chatting. I'll go out for a walk. Shura stood up from his seat beside Qin Hao, raised his head, and walked away with his hands behind his back. Along the way, the sword gods and heavenly Tao overseers stepped back and made way for him. Shura's aura was too strong. I'll go out for a walk too. Just as Shura was about to leave, Zhan Meng also stood up and followed Shura out with a solemn face. He felt that the black-clothed god that Qin Hao had brought with him was a threat, full of killing intent and the aura of death. He had to go out and keep an eye on him. Any random move from Shura could cause irreversible destruction to Genie City. Zhang Ming would not be at ease if he did not keep an eye on him. That is, Lu Shun turned his head slightly and looked at Shura's disappearing figure. There were not many experts in the untainted land who could suppress Zhang Ming with divine willpower. Even if there were, it would only be a divine king faction. Therefore, Lu Shun could see that Shura's background was probably very high, so high that it was far beyond his imagination. The lord of the divine world of massacre, the divine prince of the ancient underworld, God Shura. Qin Hao introduced. As soon as these words were spoken, the vast main hall fell into a deathly silence. Looking around, the thousands of high-level sword gods all had the same expression on their faces. Their mouths were agape, their eyes were wide open, sweat glistening on their foreheads, and their eyes were filled with fear. In the eyes of the sword gods of the sword world, perhaps the title of a divine lord of the world of massacre was nothing. After all, the sword world had seen too many divine lords over the years. When Jun Mo led the army here, he had brought 8 divine lords with him. Among the many divine king factions that had watched the battle back then, the weakest was a divine lord. Most of them had stepped into the ranks of the top great gods. But the second half of Qin Hao's words shocked and terrified the sword gods of the sword world. Shura was not only a divine lord of a world, but also the divine prince of the underworld, the son of the Nether King. The Heavenly Edict army had retreated, but the shadow that Jun Mo had cast over the hearts of these sword cultivators. He was a divine prince with immense power. They never would have thought that when Qin Hao returned from outside, he would actually abduct the son of a divine king. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. In the deathly silent hall, the sword gods all felt the same heartbeat coming from their chests. It grew faster and louder until it was a mess. It sounded like countless war drums were beating wildly. It made the Sword King Hall, which had been devoid of war, feel as if an intense battle had broken out. Everyone was shocked, especially Dragon Master and Long Ao. Once, Long Ao was also the noble son of the divine Dragon King. He had enjoyed the same status as Jun Mo. Because of this, Long Ao was even more terrified than the others. The Sword World's foundation was not small, but it could not compare to a divine king faction. Therefore, the sword cultivators did not know how terrifying divine Prince Shura was. They only thought that he was the son of a divine king. But Long Ao was different. He knew more about the primordial world. For example, the war between the divine kings of the ancient underworld and the light domain. Azura was the only existence in the world that dared to fight against a god king. Furthermore, he was able to survive the battle. He did not cross the limit of a divine lord. He attacked a divine king with his divine lord cultivation base and survived. This was simply a shocking matter. It was not an exaggeration to call it a legend. At this moment, Long Ao saw the legendary figure who competed with a divine king. Shura, it really is him. Long Ao's 2 huge dragon palms kept rubbing his chest to calm the trembling dragon origin heart. Long Ao's actions were unsightly and even wretched, but no one dared to criticize him. After all, everyone's performance was not much better. Brother Long, what do you mean? What kind of person is he? God Lu was already suffocated by the words Prince of God, but he did not fully understand what he meant by Long Ao's words. Long Ao closed his dragon eyes and shook his head silently. He did not dare to mention it again. Shura was a legend. This was true. At the same time, he was also a nightmare and a curse. The ancient Nether Realm was destroyed in the light. The Nether King's youngest daughter died in that unparalleled battle. Any hint of exposure from the outside world would hurt Shura. It was like knowing that he was covered in cuts and bruises, but still wanted to peel open his flesh layer by layer to see how deep the wounds were. How could Long Ao dare to say another word? He was afraid. Shura was an existence that even the Divine King did not respect. Even if the Dragon God King stood beside Long Ao, he did not feel safe. At the very least, the second Long Ao said, "It's really him, his soul was sucked in by an invisible force that chilled him to the bone. Long Ao instantly felt that the hall in front of him had become the Azura hell of the underworld. Chapter 2238. Qin Hao briefly described the changes in the sword world over the years. After listening to Zhan Wu, Qin Hao also told everyone about his experience in the massacre world. It was really strange, bloody, and dangerous. Step by step, he walked on the edge of a knife. If he wasn't careful, he would break his lifeline. Everyone listened attentively, their hearts on tenterhooks, as they imagined the scene Qin Hao described. It was as if they had personally experienced it. While they rejoiced at Qin Hao's good luck, they couldn't help but admire his resourcefulness and methods, especially when he personally destroyed 2 of his own god powers. This kind of ruthlessness was not something that ordinary people would dare to do. However, in that kind of life and death situation, Qin Hao was helpless. After that, Long Aomo sighed. Shura was a legend. But wasn't Qin Hao also a legend? Shura was the only god who dared to fight with a god king and survived. However, no one had heard of small god who could survive in the hands of Shura. The longer they lived, the better. Looking at it this way, Qin Hao could be considered the only one. The conversation in the hall was endless. Even if they talked for 3 days and 3 nights, they still wouldn't be able to finish. Zhan Wu, Vivian Loy, Li Guangxing, Xin, Clan Lord, God Lu, everyone present had a bellyful of things to say. In fact, there were simply too many people who didn't have a chance to get a word in edgewise. For example, the red-faced Grandmaster Lu of the Kunlun Sea, Fairy Lotus, Fairy Su, and the other fellow disciples of the Seamless Academy, including the princes and princesses of Rakujinji and True Dragonsword World. They all wanted to have a good chat with Qin Hao. This didn't include Lu Qiu and Long Miao, who went out to train. Calculating the time, Lu Qiu and Long Miao should be on their way back. They had left a voice transmission jade slip in their hands, and they already knew that Qin Hao had returned to the Sword World. They were probably rushing over without stopping. Sword Pass City had a completely different scenery from the Slaughter Dominion. Shura walked out of the Sword King Hall and ignored Zhan Meng, who was spying on him from behind. He strolled alone on the streets and looked at the shops of various sizes on both sides of the bustling street. He looked at the smiles on the faces of the citizens of Sword World and the occasional quarrel. This world was filled with the smell of smoke and fire. This was what the God Realm should be like. The scenery of Jinni City was the ideal world that the Azura Prince had tried his best to create. As for the Slaughter God, domain below Azura foam, perhaps I should really change myself. Azura muttered in frustration. Uncle, my ball. A little boy's voice came from beside him. Shura lowered his head. It was unknown when a cloth ball had rolled to his feet. Perhaps sensing Shura's hostility, the young man wanted to pick up the toy, but he did not dare to do so. Shura bent down and picked up the cloth ball with both hands. With a smile, he walked towards the little boy and placed the cloth ball in the boy's hands. He rubbed the little boy's head and continued to walk down the street with his hands behind his back. This guy. Behind him, Zhan Meng's face twitched. The accompanying god of war guards also broke out in cold sweat for the boy. However, it seemed that the great god, who was emitting malice and had an aura of death, was not as evil as they had imagined. As Shura walked, he admired the scenery of Jinni City. As for Zhan Meng and the god of war guards who were following him from afar, as long as they did not take the initiative to block his path or provoke him, he could completely ignore them. After walking for a long time, Shura suddenly stopped in his tracks. He seemed to have sensed something. A strong light suddenly flashed across his divine sense, and his body trembled slightly. Then, Shura subconsciously looked in a certain direction. His pitch-black eyes seemed to see through the boundless world and saw a world even further away. Slaughter Dao intent. Did I sense it wrongly? Shura started walking again. The wisp of slaughter aura in his divine sense disappeared. However, this was not the main point. Instead, he sensed a trace of a soul from the aura that was of the same origin as his. Could it be? In the Azura Palace far away in the vast wilderness, The main body locked on the netherworld iron throne had separated another soul and chased after him to the sword world. Did this mean that the main body did not trust him? Was the main body afraid that he would not be able to protect Qin Hao? At this moment, the discussion in the Sword King Hall was still lively. The hall was brightly lit day and night. Laughter and cries could be heard from time to time. This lasted for 4 to 5 days before gradually dissipating. Qin Hao had returned to the sword world and had to take care of the emotions of too many people. If God Lu and the Dragon Master had not spoken, the discussion in the hall would not have weakened or stopped even if it had continued for a few more days. However, it did not matter. There would be plenty of time in the future. Furthermore, this time, no one would force Qin Hao away. Sword King Palace, Prince Pavilion. This was Wux's private territory. As the successor of the Sword God King, it was a residence specially built for the sword world. Qin Hao rested his arms on the window frame. From Wux's room, he looked down at the bustling streets of Jinni City. The sword world had suffered a great calamity. Not only was it not defeated, it was even stronger than before. The sword cultivators were also more united. The future of the entire sword world was bright. Now that you're back, don't leave. The sword world needs you. Wux poured 2 cups of wine and smiled as he looked affectionately at a fairy-like woman in the room. This woman pinched his arm, indicating that Qin Hao was still here and that he mustn't be impolite. Then, the woman picked up a tray and walked out. It was Qin Xiaohe of Kunlun. I never expected you and Xiaohe to get married. I missed a wedding banquet. I should be punished. Qin Hao turned around and took the wine cup that Wu Kei handed over to him. Then, he gulped it down. Thinking back to that year, his wedding with Xiao Han had been a grand occasion, filled with distinguished guests. Apart from the East Continent, the emperors of the other 3 regions had all been present. That grand wedding of 8 newlyweds had been unforgettable. Now, Wux had a family and was far away from the divine wilderness. He married the first woman in the sword world that moved his heart. Perhaps Wux's wedding would be just as grand, or even grander than Qin Hao's. After all, this was the sword world, and all the gods served as a foil. However, Wux did not have any close friends. Only Zhan Wu, Zhan Lu, and Zhan Lang were there. Although they were also from the divine wilderness, they were not close to Wux. They even felt a little uncomfortable. In short, his wedding was miserable. He had no elders of the sword sect, no sincere friends, and was completely pushed up by the big shots of the sword world. It was very much like borrowing seeds. God Lu and Dragon Master clearly wanted him to leave behind a perfect sword bone as soon as possible. They were afraid that he would die the next day. That would be a catastrophe for the sword world. After all, it was easy for a divine prince to die. When we return to the divine wilderness, I'll make it up for you and hold another wedding banquet. Qin Hao looked at Wux's sad expression and couldn't help but want to laugh. Let's talk about the future in the future. If it's really possible, you don't need to return to the divine wilderness. Just hold a wedding for me in the myriad worlds and invite the divine kings to celebrate with me. Wux said. Plop. Qin Hao almost fell. You dare to think about that? Even Qin Hao didn't receive such treatment when the divine kings celebrated. Hee, back to the topic. I know your ambition is not in the sword world. In fact, you came here completely for me. Wux's perfect heaven wheel and his current position as the successor of the divine sword king were all pushed up by Qin Hao. Everything he did was to perfect Wux's great Tao. Now, as you can see, the sword world is rising. It needs you very much, especially since Lu Qiu's sword soul is crippled and Long Miao is suppressed and rejected by the divine swords, causing some problems with his temperament. If not for the sunset battle god and Sister Wei coming, I'm afraid I won't be able to shoulder it alone. No one could describe the feeling of loneliness. Wux had enough. He could perfectly complete the goals set by the divine swords, but in the sword world, he didn't have a true friend. Why? Aren't you afraid that I'll steal your position and become the king of the sword world? Qin Hao joked. If you really can, you can give it a try. However, I won't admit defeat so easily. Wux said seriously. All right. You're being so serious. You're ruining my mood. Qin Hao waved his hand casually and said, Wux, everyone will have to shoulder everything by themselves for a period of time. Don't have extravagant hopes that others will understand and support you, because this is the Tao of cultivation, and it's also the Tao of life. I won't stay in the sword world, but I won't leave forever. When you need me the most, I will definitely be by your side. However, the position of the Divine Sword King successor is really not suitable for me, because my great Tao is the Tao of pills. Qin Hao turned back to look at the Sword Pass city outside the window. The sword world was one of the sites of his cultivation. He was right, because Qin Hao would eventually return to the primeval realm. That was not only the agreement between him and Zhang Wu, but also a mountain in his heart that he needed to crush. He would eventually return to where he came from, and even beyond that. Chapter 2239. On the path of cultivation, there might be companions, but they wouldn't always be together. The further one went, the greater the deviation between the companions. It was easy to make up for Wu's wedding, but it was too difficult to make Qin Hao stay in Sword World. Besides, Qin Hao was a natural person who liked to be unrestrained. In the following days, Qin Hao accompanied Vivian all day long. In order to help Qin Hao comprehend the great Tao and become a god, Mu Xinjiao left with a heart full of heroism. He willingly sacrificed himself without any worries. Qin Hao couldn't grab a soul from the heavenly Tao. Mu Xinjiao let go of everything. He knew that even if Qin Hao became a god, he would take good care of Mu Yue. Therefore, he died without any reluctance. Zhang Wu often came to discuss the next step with Qin Hao. Whenever Zhang Wu came, Vivian would find an excuse to leave and give them some private time. As for what they talked about, no one knew. As Qin Hao returned to Sword World, the sword cultivators who went out to train and travel frequently returned. Lucio and Long Mo arrived at Jiani City on the same day. However, when Qin Hao saw Lucio, other than being surprised, he also felt sad. Lucio had also married the eldest daughter of the Mu clan, Mu Bai's elder sister. Moreover, she gave birth to a son, a boy. Perhaps it was because Lucio's sword soul was destroyed back then, but her child was born without a sword soul. Even the bloodline talent of the Mu clan was destroyed by Junmo's divine king bloodline, causing this innocent child to be born without a life soul. He was born with the most serious Tao flaw. The Lu clan was a powerful clan in Sword World, a divine master family with supreme glory. Lucio's soulless son was born in such a powerful environment and was destined to have a mediocre future. One could imagine how sad this was. When talking to Qin Hao, Lucio was very calm. She didn't feel depressed or dispirited. She even thought that this was good. He said that at the very least, the little fellow wouldn't have to shoulder heavy responsibilities for the sword dimension because his natural talent was too dazzling all those years ago. Being ordinary was also a blessing. However, Qin Hao still noticed the disappointment in Lucio's eyes when she said these words. Back then, Lucio was a peerless talent. How could such a proud genius be willing to be mediocre? Who wouldn't want their descendants to become dragons and phoenixes? From the marriage between the Lu family and the Mu family, it could be seen that God Lu intended to use the Mu family bloodline to preserve Lucio's bloodline when Lucio's life spirit was destroyed. He even fantasized about creating a stronger bloodline. Unfortunately, Junmo's bloodline was too strong. Even though he was dead, he crushed God Lu's hope and Lucio's last hope into nothingness. The Lu clan was very strong. As long as Lu Shun didn't die, they were the absolute overlords of the sword world. Even if Lucio was crippled, no one would dare underestimate him. However, outside the sword dimension, during this trip, Lucio had a deep understanding of what it meant to have the will, but not the strength. In the past, the great celestial wheel could not even bear his sword intent. Now, he needed a guard to protect him and his child. At that moment, Lucio clearly saw the disappointment on his son's face. It was like a sharp thorn in Lucio's heart. He was no longer worthy of being the strong person in his child's heart. Because of the fusion of the sword dimension, Lucio also lost the ability to use the heavenly Tao. As time went on, the fusion of the sword dimension became more and more perfect. Lucio's weakness of losing his sword spirit became more and more obvious. He didn't expect that when he drove the chariot and led thousands of sword cultivators to charge into the Heaven Decree battle formation, that last sword strike with the heavenly Tao would become the most dazzling strike of his life. Perhaps soon, he wouldn't even be able to defeat the little sword cultivators in the sword dimension. Long Yao's condition was much better than Lucio's. Like his father, he put on a lot of weight and looked chubby. However, this made Long Miao seem more dignified and tough. In fact, ever since Wuk was appointed as the Sword Dimension's god's son, the sword gods didn't reject Long Miao. It was just that many important matters were no longer handed over to him, and he wasn't allowed to participate. In the eyes of the big shots of the Sword Realm, all of those things needed to be done by Wu Quebec. Only with Wu Kei's perfect sword Dao could it be resolved neatly, so that the outside world could clearly see how powerful the Sword Realm was now. However, this hurt Long Miao's self-esteem imperceptibly. He admitted that his talent wasn't as good as Wuk's. However, he wasn't a good-for-nothing. He could still fight and bring glory to the Sword Dimension and the Dragon Race. Unfortunately, the Sword Dimension didn't give him such a chance. They placed all their focus on Wuk and tried to establish Wuk as an invincible figure. Because of this, Long Miao drifted outside for many years and almost never returned to the Sword Dimension. The wounds on his body increased, and his state of mind became more and more ruthless. Because of the slaughter and blood in the outside world, he could regain the glory of being the Dragon Prince. He was once like Lucio and was seen as having endless potential by the sword gods. Qin Hao, Lucio, and Long Miao sat and talked for many days. They drank until they were dead drunk and couldn't help but do some ridiculous things. Therefore, they exchanged a few moves with Qin Hao and were beaten black and blue in the end. They didn't hate Qin Hao, nor were they jealous of Wuk. They just wanted to vent. Lucio and Long Miao believed that only Qin Hao truly understood them. These days, Qin Hao lost sight of Shura. He couldn't find Shura's aura at all and didn't know where he had gone. Qin Hao wasn't worried about this. Although Shura was evil, his nature was pure. As long as one didn't deliberately provoke him, he basically wouldn't hurt others, especially sword cultivators who were inferior to ants in Shura's eyes. There weren't many people in this world who were qualified to make Shura fight. Probably only those God Kings. Challenging God Kings was exciting. In the blink of an eye, more than a month had passed. Those who were supposed to return had basically returned. The old subordinates of the Seamless World had also gathered. Next, Qin Hao had something important to do. Guardian Spirit. On this day, incomparably resplendent sword shadows soared into the sky from the imperial palace of Jiani City. It wasn't just one. Instead, they were densely packed and majestic. They were like a huge army going out for war, heading toward the most painful part of the sword dimension, the broken heavenly Tao. That was the battlefield from 300 years ago, the seamless divine domain. The seamless Tao will disappeared, and the heavenly Tao collapsed crazily with an irresistible force. No one could stop it. In the end, Senior Tian Yong took action. He used the primordial Tao will of the perfect heavenly wheel to stabilize the dissipating heavenly Tao fragments. He moved the sea to fill the land, moving the Kunlun Sea over and merging it with the heavenly Tao. Only then was it preserved. God Lu and Qin Hao walked side by side. The other was the Dragon Lord. With Qin Hao's return to the Sword Dimension, the two Divine Masters had subconsciously replaced Wuk's position with Qin Hao's. At this moment, Wuk was still behind them, causing the latter to be depressed. But thinking about it, it made sense. In the original plan, Qin Hao was God Lord Avicii's ideal successor to the Sword God King. And in the Battle of Floating Glass Sword Arena, Qin Hao had defeated Lucio. If Qin Hao hadn't been fearless of the Heavenly Edict army and brazenly charged into the battle and forced Qin Hao to retreat, Lucio would have died long ago. In terms of strength, courage, and spirit, Qin Hao is indeed a unique existence in the Sword Dimension. It seems that if I have the chance, I will have to return to the heavens, Oyster Realm, and thank Senior Tianyong. Qin Hao said. In his heart, He thought that it didn't matter whether he thanked him or not. Tian Yong was such a tyrannical existence that he couldn't be bothered to care. It was true that he had followed orders in the past. As a subordinate of the heavenly Tao in the heavens oyster realm, he had never stepped into the heavens oyster divine domain. Looking at it this way, it was too disrespectful and irresponsible. And Xine's words completely confirmed Qin Hao's guess. You should have gone long ago. Back then, I asked the Divine Master why he didn't send a divine envoy to summon you to the Heaven's Oyster Temple to accept the title. Guess what the Divine Master said? What did he say? Qin Hao turned to look at Xine. Shouldn't a mere heavenly Tao controller take the initiative to come and pay respects to me? Xine said with a straight face, using the tone of Tian Yong. Qin Hao's face instantly turned green. Chapter 2240. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation ever since he became the ruler of the Kunlun Plain. Qin Hao had been waiting for Tian Ho to summon him, but the divine envoy never came. Only now did he realize that this was not a test, nor was Tian Ho ignoring him. He was waiting for him to come. This was really. After the powers of the three realms merged, the distance between the God Realm and the God Realm gradually shortened. The mighty army of sword cultivators set off from Jiani City, and before long, they arrived at the ruins of the battlefield from 300 years ago, the seamless divine domain. The shattered heavenly Tao was filled with terrifying cracks. Tian Ho used the primordial Tao to stabilize it, but the cracks remained as they were when they were broken. It was a shocking sight. The dark sky was no longer as clear as before, and the light of calamity flashed from time to time from the cracks. The desolate land was dark red and scorched, as if a rain of blood had completely dyed the soil. Collapsed mountains, twisted rivers, and ruins of buildings floated in the void. At a glance, this place was still the same as before. However, the divine domain was surrounded by the immortal sea. It was the new energy from the immortal sea that enveloped the precarious heavenly Tao, preventing it from completely shattering. After so many years, the Sword Realm still did not send anyone to repair it. God Lu, Dragon Master, and every sword cultivator in the realm believed that the seamless divine domain should be maintained in its destroyed state to stimulate sword cultivators to become stronger and prosper the way of the sword. The tragedy could not be allowed to happen again. Qin Hao was the first to slowly float down. Actually, from far away, he could see the boundary steel that everyone was talking about. An incomparably huge divine stone was suppressing this place, and the words Tian Ho Realm were written on it. The inscriptions and words on the steel exuded boundless divine power, causing one to be filled with reverence. The moment the boundary steel fell, the heavenly edict army had already retreated. To this day, no outside force dared to touch the Sword Realm. Qin Hao indeed owed Tian Ho a great favor. With his status and power of the divine path, there was no need for him to care about a mere controller of Kunlun's heavenly Tao. However, Tian Ho still came, and with his powerful attack, he forced Jun Mo to retreat. As he moved forward step by step, Qin Hao's footsteps grew heavier and heavier. Tombstones of various sizes appeared before his eyes, and they formed a dense and jagged expanse of the heavens and the earth. It was like a group of tombs that buried the heavens, and it revealed an oppressive, solemn, heroic, and sorrowful aura. Each tombstone was inscribed with the name of the deceased. Supreme God Dan, Hidden Spiritual Master Xuani, Immortal God Master, Divine, Soaring Cloud, Soaring Divine. As Qin Hao walked step by step through these tombstones, he could vaguely see the scenes of the past. In order to pave the way for him, these seniors had faced the attacks of hundreds and thousands of heavenly wheeled divine soldiers. The scene was so tragic that even now, when he recalled it, his heart was still in turmoil, and his emotions were difficult to calm down. Further ahead, Qin Hao saw the tombs of Dean Nan and Northern Dipper, Celestial Venerable. Nan Luo, you had always disliked Qin Hao, but when the Sword Realm was in danger, He worked together with the endless sword gods to resist the Heavenly Edict army. In the end, he was killed by June Mo himself. Northern Dipper, celestial venerable, had the illusion giant god Dharma body and moved mountains as swords. His sword mountains destroyed countless enemies that invaded the endless world before he died of exhaustion. The more Qin Hao walked, the harder it was for him to walk. It was as if there were two iron balls tied to his legs. He looked to the side and saw a dragon-shaped tombstone on his left. It was especially eye-catching. On it was the name of First Prince Long Tian. My big brother was killed by 10 Heavenly Edict divine generals of the 70,000 divine Tao. When he died, his entire dragon body was shattered. Long Miao's eyes were red as he choked with sobs. Qin Hao knew that the dragon race dominated the primordial world with their physical bodies. Long Tian's strength could be ranked at the top of the 3 great sword realms, excluding the divine masters. His dragon body had been smashed into meat paste by divine power. One could imagine how much pain he had suffered. Qin Hao stopped walking. He bowed deeply towards Long Tian's tombstone. He rubbed his face and tried his best to control his emotions as he continued to walk forward. The tombs were too big. Tens of thousands of swordsmen were buried there. Many people did not recognize the godly titles on the tombs. Every 3 steps Qin Hao took, he would pay his respects. At the last step, he would pay his respects. It was as if he was walking over countless corpses. His heart beat faster and faster. Every beat made him feel extremely uncomfortable. He clenched his fists and dragged his heavy footsteps to the center of the tombs. Here, he saw the teachers and elders who had taken care of him the most when he came to the sword world. They had guided him in the way of his sword. On one side, there was Daisakong, Venerable Dongsheng, Tianyang Kenshin, and Tianyang's wife, Princess Lu. On the other side, there was the tomb of Venerable Ancient Sword, Blind Sword, Wind Sword, Grass Sword, and Severing Love. And the tombstone at the center was Divine Master Wu Jian. Thump! Qin Hao could no longer support the weight on his legs. He staggered and knelt in front of Wu Jian's tomb. He choked with sobs. Senior, 3rd day, is back. The space was silent. Qin Hao was left alone in front. Everyone stood far away, not wanting to disturb him. Wu Jian's death not only severely injured Qin Hao, but also the entire Great Tao Sword Realm. It caused one of the 3 divine masters to die. The Sword Realm had lost its glory forever. One head after another fell. Qin Hao owed each tombstone at the center of the tombstones. In front of each tombstone, he kowtowed 24 times until blood flowed out from the cracked skin on his forehead. Brother, get up. You're making people feel very uncomfortable. Loi quickly walked forward and tried to help Qin Hao up several times, but she couldn't, until someone followed Qin Hao and knelt down and cried. Grandfather, father, mother, 3rd day is back to see you. The unshaven Si Huan hugged Daisakong's tombstone and sobbed. The king of West Capital's entire family was buried here. He was the only one left. He was the most worthless and incompetent piece of trash in the sword world. Woo-woo, young master, if you cry like this, 3rd day will feel even more sad. Don't cry. Zhang San pulled Si Huan's arm away and said. She pulled Zhang San and knelt down, hugging Daisakong's tombstone and crying nonstop. Master, disciple has come to see you. Sect Master, Sky Sovereign, Granduncle, Grandpa. Under Si Huan's influence, in an instant, the army of sword cultivators standing far behind began to wail one after another. As if they were running for a funeral, they scuttled out repeatedly and found the graves of their respective elders. They knelt and cried incessantly, and the entire space was filled with mourning. Stop them! Quickly stop them! God Lu ordered. Today, Qin Hao's guardian spirit had been lured here. What kind of scandal was this? Heavenly God's Council, stop them for me, Dragon Lord ordered. Although he was also very sad when he saw Long Tian's tombstone, he was the God Master of the sword world and had to consider the overall situation. Crash! The members of the Heavenly God's Council who had come with the army turned into a human wall and blocked the sword cultivators' formation. However, they were unable to stop them. Even the direct descendants of the Mu divine clan, who led the heavenly gods' council, ran out and knelt in the middle of the tombstones. They began to recount their grief in front of the tombstone where the Mu divine ancestor was buried. Grandfather, grandfather, you died so miserably. When you died, no one cared about you. They all rushed into the heavenly edict army to save that star of calamity who shouldn't have been saved. The one kneeling in front of the Mu divine ancestor's tombstone was Mubai. Seeing Mubai like this, Lucio's pupils shrank. He thought that this guy wouldn't take advantage of the situation to cause trouble, right? Chapter 22:41. In the battle 300 years ago, the Heavenly Edict army blocked the Heavenly Tao of the Avicii Divine Realm and divided the battlefield into two. Qin Hao and the Avicii Divine Realm were trapped in the middle, while the Dragon Lord, Lu Shun, and the sword cultivators of the three realms were outside the Heavenly Tao. In order to break through the enemy's formation and rescue Qin Hao, Lucio led the group of 8 to break through the enemy's formation several times. But they all failed because there was a Divine Lord in the Heavenly Edict army. The Mu family's old patriarch appeared at this time and used all his divine power to swing his sword, cutting through the enemy's formation and injuring the defending Divine Lord. This created an opportunity for Lucio to draw upon the power of the world and finally severely injure the defending Divine Lord. However, the Mu family's old patriarch paid the price with his life, and the Mu family lost a mountain. This battle was unavoidable. It was as if the desolate Ian had deliberately brewed this calamity to cleanse the sword world. It couldn't be blamed entirely on Qin Hao. However, some people in the sword world didn't think so. In their opinion, Qin Hao was the root of the disaster. Qin Hao had brought disaster to the sword world. If Qin Hao hadn't taken a mirror of samsara that Jun Mo coveted, the sword world wouldn't have ended up like this. During the days when he was on the run, Qin Hao had also lived in guilt. Even now, he still blamed himself. Not to mention Mubai. Among the sword cultivators in the sword world who opposed Qin Hao's return, Mubai was one of them and the one who opposed it the most. Looking up at Qin Hao kneeling in front of the Avicii monument, Mubai's eyes were red. He got up and walked over step by step. As he walked, he clenched his hands into fists and growled in a hoarse voice. "What right do you have? What right do you have? So many people in the sword world died for you. Their families were broken, their families were separated, and the world was destroyed. You don't deserve it. You're guilty. You are the sinner of the sword world, the bane of the sword world. As long as you stay here, the sword world will never walk out of the haze of misfortune." Whoosh! War Tower, Heaven Doe, and Wave Slayer all took a step forward. "Young Master Mu, watch your actions," Wuk said in a low voice. Was he trying to start a fight within the Sword Realm? Qin Hao is still kneeling in front of Wu Jin's monument. He didn't oppose Mu Bai, and he secretly gestured to Wang Lu and the others to not interfere. When he returned to the Sword Realm this time, he didn't have any intention of staying. He wouldn't turn the Sword Realm into something in his hands, and he wouldn't obstruct anyone or any clan's position in the Sword Realm. He was only here to return something to the Sword Realm. Then, he would take the initiative to leave. At this moment, Mubai stopped and looked coldly at Wuk. The other party had a noble status and was the Sword World's divine son. Naturally, he had the right to reprimand him. However, Mubai did not think that he had said anything wrong. He pointed at Qin Hao and said loudly to all the swordsmen, "Do you think I'm wrong? Don't you have the same thoughts as me? Okay, let's make a hypothesis. If the Sword Realm didn't have Li Chuji back then, would there have been a battle at Wujian? Tell me." Mubai looked at Lucio and said, "Brother-in-law, you were once the #1 swordsman in the Sword Realm. After losing the glazed sword spirit, why don't you even have the courage to speak? Tell me, if it wasn't for Li Chuji, how could your sword spirit have been destroyed by Jun Mo? Even if you've accepted your fate and lost your spirit, have you ever thought about my poor nephew? Who did that child offend? He was born with a missing natal spirit. He's innocent. Isn't that pitiful? Mubai, that's enough." Lucio's body trembled as he clenched his fists. "Ha ha, brother-in-law. You've really become a person who accepts adversity. It's fine, I'll ask Long Miao again. Come, Prince Long Miao, tell me, if it wasn't for Li Chuji, Prince Long Tian would still be busy training the soldiers in the monster army. Why would there be an extra dragon tomb here? Mubai, what's wrong with you? Long Miao gritted his teeth. I'm not crazy. You're the ones who are crazy. Mubai spat and roared with all his might. He is clearly a sinner of the sword realm. Not only did you not punish him, you even tried to get close to him and support him. Who does he think he is? Has he ever done anything for the sword realm? Other than bringing this group of tombs, Li Chuji only knows how to run. He left the Divine King's army to the sword realm. We sword cultivators will always be the ones who bleed. We have to bear all the pain while he's free and unfettered. He escaped with the mirror of reincarnation. Is there any justice in this? Isn't he afraid of retribution? The shouts were deafening. Although they were too straightforward and even a little overboard, the sword cultivators present were all moved. To a certain extent, Mu Baidi wasn't wrong. If they could start over and the sword world didn't have Li Chu San, then perhaps they wouldn't be standing under this broken heavenly Tao and worshipping the countless heroic spirits of the sword world. But what could Qin Hao do? Back then, he only had one divine vein. If he didn't escape, would he be waiting for death? In front of the Divine King's army, one person was too insignificant. No one could change the situation. If Qin Hao didn't leave, the war would be even more intense. It wouldn't be over so easily. In the end, what would be destroyed wouldn't just be the Avicii divine domain. Would Rikujinji and the true dragon sword realm be safe and sound? Taking a step back, even if the sword cultivators could rely on their own strength to defeat Jun Mo back then, once, twice, would they be able to defeat the Divine King's army countless times? That was the Divine King. If there weren't thousands of divine masters under his command, there would be at least 100. The Tianzhao army that attacked the sword realm was more than the tip of the iceberg. To the Tianzhao Divine King himself, it was probably an insignificant force. Under such circumstances, Qin Hao's departure was the best protection for the sword realm. He had already done his best to protect the heavenly Tao. Unfortunately, his strength was too weak. After saying so much, your main point is nothing more than the mirror of reincarnation. You must be unhappy to see Qin Hao become stronger in the outside world, right? Zhang Wu stepped out and walked straight up. He stood in front of Mu Bai, and the two of them looked at each other. Mu Bai faced Zhang Wu, who was from the War God clan. The other party's innate aura made his eyelids twitch. He sneered and said, "So what if it is? Shouldn't the mirror of reincarnation be returned to its rightful owner and belong to the sword realm?" So many people from the sword realm had died. They had already done their best to help Li Chuji escape. Now that he had returned, they should take the initiative to return the Chaos Divine artifact to the sword realm. At least in this way, Mu Bai felt that it was fair. Divine Master Avicii and the 6 founding elders of the Academy had died a worthy death. Are you trying to estimate the value of the artifact with me? Zhang Wu asked. The sword cultivators' deaths were considered a transaction? To be honest, this makes sense. Divine Master Avicii must have thought the same way back then. That's why he risked his life for Li Chuji. Now, shouldn't the artifact be returned to the sword realm? Mu Bai said. Once, he was one step away from the mirror of reincarnation. He had almost become the owner of the Chaos Divine artifact. Chapter 2242. Whether it was a favor or a deal, there had to be a return. Otherwise, why did so many people die for no reason in Sword World? Silence filled the air. Mu Bai's sharp words pushed Qin out of the heart of the storm, turning him into the target of public criticism. Everyone's gaze was fixed on him, their expressions becoming more and more strange. At this moment, God Lu and Dragon Master's expressions were very ugly. Bringing Qin out of the sacrificial spirit was supposed to be a very solemn and sacred matter. However, Mu Bai made things so awkward that they couldn't advance or retreat. Mu Bai's view of the big picture was too narrow. However, whether it was calming the crowd with force or deterrence, it was difficult to convince them. Qin Hao had to stand up and explain something. Fine. Since you said so, I will also settle the score with you. Suppose. Zhang Wu scanned the sword cultivators present. Qin hadn't taken the mirror of reincarnation. It was taken by someone else in Sword World. Like you, young Master Mubai, the heavens could be witnesses. When Zhang Wu pointed at Mubai, the latter's body trembled violently. Does that mean that Junmo's target is no longer Qin Hao? At least, his main target isn't Qin Hao but you? Zhang Wu said. Ridiculous. Your hypothesis is complete nonsense. Mubai said angrily. Yes, hypotheses are very ridiculous. Just like your hypothesis just now. Back to the topic. Qin Hao didn't take the mirror of reincarnation, but you took it. Then, Junmo's enemy is Sword World. Qin Hao could have stayed out of it. After that, Senior Tianyong wouldn't have come to help. To be able to defeat the Heavenly Zhao army, it was up to Sword World's own ability. You have to bear the consequences alone. Since Mubai wanted to settle the score, Zhang Wu did the same. Because of Qin Hao, Sword World received help from Tianyong God World. That's why the Battle God clan stationed the God King army here to protect Sword World for 300 years. Touch your conscience and think, without Qin Hao, what are you? Who can defeat Shangji and intimidate Junmo? Do you have God Master Wu Ji? Or God Lu, or Dragon Master? In the battle back then, Wu Ji, Lu Shun, and Dragon Master had struggled to move in front of powerful enemies. Disregarding everything else, Fun Wei, Xin Shi, and the 10 Ultimates were all on par with them. Not to mention, there were also 4 other Divine Masters, and the strongest person in the primordial realm below the Divine Kings, Shangji, who could be defeated by the upper extremity. Who could they rely on? You? Zhang Wu pointed at Mubai's nose. If Shangji was here, he probably wouldn't even look at Mubai. You? Mubai's expression became worse and worse. His body started to tremble. Zhang Wu's words were terrifying. If they lost Tianyong God and the Battle God clan's God King army, Sword World would be unimaginable. According to you, we should have handed Qin Hao over. Since you have the mirror of reincarnation, shouldn't we hand you over as well? All the sword cultivators here, listen up. Look at the tombstones of the heroic spirits and ask yourselves, if you have the mirror of reincarnation, should Sword World hand it over? Zhang Wu's gaze swept across Lu Qiu, Long Mian, and many other disciples of the big clans. No one here dared to answer. According to Zhang Wu, if Lu Qiu took the mirror of reincarnation, they would hand over Lu Qiu. If Long Mian took the mirror of reincarnation, then what was the use of Sword World? A plate of loose sand. Was it still Sword World? God Lu would be the first to disagree. He would be like Wu Jian. In order to protect his son's life, he would mobilize the entire Sword World to fight against the Heavenly Edict army. Dragon Lord was the same. Any family would ask Sword World to fight against the Heavenly Edict army. If all the families could do this, then why couldn't Qin Hao do it? Why do they have to hand over Qin Hao? In your eyes, if this is a trade, then the trade partner wouldn't be you, Mubai. It would be God Master Wu Jian. If Qin Hao wants to repay, then he can only repay Senior Wu Jian, repay his daughter Loi, and repay the God Realm of Empyrean. What does that have to do with you, Mubai? Who do you think you were to jump out and ask Qin Hao for interest? What does he owe you? Zhang Wu's words weren't very nice. After all, the entire Sword World participated in that battle. But the logic was so straightforward. Qin Hao owed Wu Jian, Loi, and the God Realm of Empyrean. Even if the mirror of reincarnation was given to someone else, it could only be given to Loi. But my grandfather is dead, Mubai shouted. That's none of Qin Hao's business. Did he ask your grandfather to die? Zhang Wu turned around and looked at God Lu. He said, God Lord Lu, forgive me for being blunt. This kind of thing doesn't deserve to cultivate the way of the sword. He doesn't deserve to be a member of Sword World. However, he was your old subordinate. I have no right to make a decision. That's all I have to say. Whether the world is fair or not, it's up to you. Well said. Long Miao strode forward and said in a trembling voice, if I took the mirror of reincarnation, my brother wouldn't be Long Tian. He wouldn't deserve to be the first prince of the Dragon Clan, because he doesn't have the face. The reason why the Sword World is called the Sword World is because the Tao that we cultivate is different from other divine paths. Now that the sword world is unified, how many sword cultivators have exchanged their lives for it? Senior Wu Jian, the 6 elders of the academy, Immortal Dongsheng, Prince Long Tian, Old Master Mu, the many warriors of the 8 in the divine world of Lu, and the demon gods of the Zhenlong world. Have they ever thought of using the reincarnation mirror to strengthen their divine path? They never thought of enjoying it. Lu Qiu looked at Mu Bai from afar. He shook his head and said, Mu Bai, you really disappoint me. It wasn't easy to unify Sword World. For today's unity, too many sacrifices have been made. Mu Bai's words had vaguely torn Sword World apart. At the very least, when he pointed out Qin Hao as a criminal, the faces of the old heavenly Daos of the Seamless Realm turned extremely cold. Lu Qiu didn't dare to say anything else, but he could guarantee that as long as Qin Hao gave the order, the Seamless Realm's hundreds of planes and continents would definitely break away from Sword World and become its own world. This Mu Bai wasn't only narrow-minded, but he also didn't look at the big picture. Was Li Chuji someone he could provoke? Was he the one who had been condemned by thousands of sword cultivators with just a few words? Unfilial son, unfilial son. The patriarch of the Mu clan, the current commander of the Heavenly Gods Council, closed his eyes in grief and indignation. Today, not only had his son pushed Qin out of the heart of the struggle, he had also framed the entire Mu clan. If the old ancestor knew about this, he wouldn't be able to rest in peace in the underworld. I am no longer the master of Rikujinji. Moreover, Sword World doesn't have a Rikujinji. Right now, I am a master of Sword King Manor. I only teach my disciples and students. Dragon Master, since the Heavenly Gods Council is under your command, do as you see fit, Lu Ao said to Dragon Master. The military power of Sword World had been handed over to Long Ao. It just so happened that the Mu clan was now Long Ao's subordinate. Dragon Master's face was very stiff. He didn't know whether to punish or not to punish. This old Lu really knew how to shift the blame. He silently looked at Commander Mu and said, You can deal with your son yourself. The Mu clan had shed their blood for Sword World. The old patriarch had died when breaking the formation. Even if they didn't care about his contributions, they should care about his feelings. Commander Mu fiercely clenched his teeth and waved his hand. Men, Mu Bai is deceiving the masses and trying to split Sword World. His crime is unforgivable. Eliminate his godhead and cripple his divine power. Make his divine origin fall into the mortal world and cultivate again. Wait until he fully comprehends the great Tao, then consider bringing him back to the upper realm. The complexions of Lu Ao and Dragon Master changed slightly. His punishment was really ruthless. In any case, Mu Bai was Commander Mu's son. They had handed over the authority to deal with him in the hope that Commander Mu would be lenient with his punishment. They hadn't expected that the other party would be so ruthless. Plop! Mu Bai knelt down in front of Commander Mu. Father, Valspawn, your grandfather risked his life to unify Sword World. His illustrious reputation was completely destroyed in the hands of a wastrel like you. Today, if I let you go, how will our Mu clan have the face to rule the heavens? How will we have the face to cultivate together with Sword World? Commander Mu painfully closed his eyes. He also didn't want to cripple Mu Bai's divine path, but he had to do it. This was the bigger picture. Whoosh. Immediately, several divine generals of the Heavenly Gods Council stepped forward. They released their heavenly wheels, which were incomparably resplendent, and pressed down on Mu Bai. At this moment, a black-clothed figure stepped out from behind Mu Bai and stood firmly in front of the divine generals. You're not allowed to touch him, Mu Zhan said in a lifeless voice. Mu Zhan said in a lifeless voice. His pitch-black eyes were like a bottomless abyss. As his black hair fluttered in the wind, his body emitted dense, killing particles. That pure cold aura made the divine generals feel a chill. Mu Zhan, Mu Bai raised his head and looked at the figure in front of him. In the end, only this person, who even he himself knew, was willing to risk everything to protect him. Back then, Mu Zhan had been seriously injured, and his divine soul was on the verge of destruction. It was Muzhan who rescued Sword World from the outside world and begged his grandfather to take action and stabilize Muzhan's divine soul. Although Muzhan wasn't a member of the Mu clan, he was like a brother to Mubai. Perhaps it wouldn't be too bad if his godhead was eliminated, because Mubai understood that no matter where he went, Muzhan would follow him. If there was any danger, Muzhan would always be the first person to block a sword for him. Fall into the mortal world and cultivate again? It didn't matter. He wasn't afraid. However, what happened next caused Mubai's heart to turn cold and despair. Just as Muzhan released his killing intent to block the divine generals, a pitch-black figure descended from the sky. It was so imposing and powerful. It was unknown where it came from, but it directly tore through space and landed on the ground, standing face to face with Muzhan. The instant the figure landed, Muzhan's body suddenly stiffened. He looked at the pitch-black eyes that were as deep as his own and felt the killing aura that was even more terrifying and powerful than his own. At this moment, Muzhan was completely absent-minded. "Who are you?" Muzhan looked at Azura and asked in a daze. Azura suppressed the excitement in his eyes. It was obvious that he was suppressing it with great difficulty. It was as if he had used up all of his divine energy to barely restrain himself. After that, he raised his arm and lightly tapped Muzhan's forehead with his fingertip. "You don't need to ask who I am, just like how you don't know who you are. But you will eventually become me, the Azura god who slaughters all living beings in the god realm." As soon as he finished speaking, a vast black divine light enveloped Muzhan. Muzhan disappeared and turned into a wisp of pitch-black smoke that flowed along Azura's fingertip and merged with his body. It overlapped with his divine soul and fused with his Tao intent. At this moment, Azura closed his eyes. The aura on his body crazily rose in a peerlessly terrifying manner. It shook the group of tombs that buried the heavens. It was as if all the heroic spirits in the tombs were worshipping a monarch that controlled the kingdom of death. Chapter 2243. Amidst his grief, Azura comprehended the ultimate meaning of the path of killing. Ingshaa's death bestowed each of his soul manifestations with an independent life. Good, evil, wisdom, stupidity. Love, hate, infatuation, madness. Joy, anger, sorrow, joy. The manifestations formed from all kinds of emotions represented a completely different side of Azura. They were like a group of people with different personalities, but they were all a part of Azura. Evil inherited 90% of Azura's divine cultivation. Wisdom dominated Azura's divinity. Muzhan was Azura's obsession, his obsession with the divine path and cultivation. Only with the return of this strand of soul origin could Azura love someone to the point of madness and hate someone to the extreme. Compared to the other manifestations, the power of infatuation was very small, but it could not be lost. Just like how wisdom dominated divinity, Azura, who lost his obsession, would be affected whether it was cultivation, life, or thinking. It would even distort and shake his original will. This could explain why Muzhan wanted to learn the one sword 7 kills from Wuk when they first met in Central Continent City. But now Muzhan was gone. He left Mubai forever. From now on, he did not have to worry about other people's feelings and put himself in a difficult situation. After returning to the obsession of Azura, he could do whatever he wanted. Even if he caused chaos in the wilderness, almost no one could stop him. Muzhan had never been loyal to Mubai, but infatuated with him since he was born. The divine radiance that soared into the sky gradually dissipated. The darkness that shrouded everyone's heads slowly entered Azura's body. At this time, his deep eyes were filled with another emotion. Azura silently looked at Qin Hao with a grateful gaze. He finally understood the meaning of the divine monk from the Southern Heaven Buddhist realm. When the time comes, you will get everything you desire. He kept repeating this sentence. When Azura first sensed Qin Hao's existence, he was not sure if it was his destiny. Only when he sensed Qin Hao's evil power contained the divine power of Earth did he finally confirm it. However, at that time, Shura only thought that Qin Hao was sent by fate to open the gate of hell for him. However, Muri's appearance changed the Shura's view. Not only was Qin Hao able to open the underworld gate for him, he had even sent Sha to him, giving him a chance to resolve the regret in his heart. However, at this moment, the way Shura looked at Qin Hao was different from before. I will get everything I've been looking forward to. So that's what the Baldy meant. The impure earth returned to the underworld, and Sha's corpse found a new soul. Even Shura himself found his long-lost last soul image because of Qin Hao. He searched for it for tens of thousands of years, and his body was firmly tied to the Iron Throne. The rusty Hell King's iron had already fused with his flesh and blood, but from today onwards, he no longer needed to be bound. There was nothing in this world that could bind him anymore. He had finally obtained his peak power, and all of this was because of Qin Hao. If Azura was indebted to Qin Hao, then Qin Hao, who fell into the slaughter world, was also the person who changed Azura's fate. During the battle with Jun Mo in the slaughter world, Azura protected Qin Hao for a while, and Qin Hao returned Azura a complete life. There was hope for the underworld's revival, his sister, and Azura's complete body. He had all of these. Why does your gaze look so strange? Qin Hao and Azura looked at each other. He felt that Azura was becoming more and more different from the Azura god in his impression. Those teary eyes were a little ambiguous. He actually wanted to tell Azura in front of everyone that he had no interest in men. He hoped that Azura god would not have any bad thoughts. Right, where's Mu Zhan? Qin Hao came to his senses and was immediately stunned. He seemed to see Mu Zhan's shadow in Azura god's eyes. In an instant, Qin Hao remembered Wu god's words. Azura god was severely injured. His soul was once separated from his body by the godly king. Then, he thought about the fusion of Azura god's wisdom form and evil form. Wasn't it the same scene as before? This Mu Zhan was also a part of Azura's soul. Qin Hao felt a little dizzy. He had always wanted to take Mu Zhan under his command. Now, he realized how scary that thought was. Mu Zhan was a part of Azura's soul. How could he dare to take an Azura god who was once on par with the godly king as his subordinate? That idea was simply too dangerous. Luckily, he didn't do it. At this time, Qin Hao understood, but the sword cultivators did not. Mu Zhan evaporated into thin air as if he was absorbed by Azura. Lu Shun, Dragon Master, and the others were shocked and at a loss. There was also one more person, Mu Bai. Mu Bai was also in a daze for a long time. When he could no longer feel even a trace of Mu Zhan's aura, he suddenly jumped up from the ground and shouted at Azura god like a madman. Where's Mu Zhan? What did you do to Mu Zhan? Give it back to me. Hurry up and give Mu Zhan back to me. His shouts were earth-shattering. When he shouted the last word, it was completely heart-wrenching. Without Mu Zhan in this world, what would Mu Bai do in the future? The servant who always followed him was gone. No matter what danger he faced, the person who would always be the first to protect him was gone. He would never appear again. Mu Bai, who had just jumped up, fell to his knees with a plop. He lowered his head and wept. Only now did he realize that what he wanted was not a chaos divine tool, nor was it a great godly name, nor was it a frightening strength. It was just a sword-bearing servant who accompanied him. His heart suddenly tightened. It was as if a knife had cut out his heart and put in a rock. When he had it, he never cared. Only when he lost it did he realize how precious it was. In the past, Mu Bai was a man of few words. He was always cold like a block of wood. Even Mu Bai once ignored him. He never cared about the feelings of a block of wood. He only knew how to order people around. If he could do it all over again, Mu Bai really wanted to do one thing. He wanted to ask Mu Zhan softly, "Do you think we could do this?" But he no longer had the chance. I'm sorry. Mu Bai's dirty hands clutched his chest. His trembling heartbeat told him that his god source was still there, but he had lost something more precious than it. What reincarnation mirror? What Li Chuji? None of it mattered anymore. Mu Bai looked around. His eyes were confused, as if he was looking for something, but there was nothing around him. Take him away. Commander Mu roared. The current Mu Bai was like a beggar who had lost his soul. Even though he didn't understand what had happened to Mu Zhan, The other party was a cultivator from the slaughter domain, with the slaughtered domain's divine master present. No matter what happened, it wasn't his place to interfere. Whoosh! Two tall divine generals of the heavenly gods' council stepped forward. One of them took Mubai's arms and dragged him out of the tomb. Next, Mubai's divine path power would be crippled. His god source would be thrown into the lower realms, and he would live another life as a mortal until he comprehended the great Tao. Azura extended his hand towards Mubai, who was being dragged away. Halfway through, he put it back. His thoughts were faintly causing mischief, but the main thing in his mind was the evil face. Chapter 2244. Mubai had saved Mujan's life. When he was about to collapse from the Great Light Curse, Mubai, who was walking towards Mujan, was the only ray of light in the world. Now that his obsession had merged with the evil image, the scene of him saving Mujan was also planted in Azura's soul, allowing him to retain a trace of concern. However, this feeling was definitely not the same as Mujan's. It was very hazy, like a person who had a similar past. The past was clearly clear, but when he seriously thought about it, it would become a blur. Qin Hao saw Azura's actions and knew what he was thinking. Mubai had been by Mujan's side for many years, so he had indeed influenced Azura a little. Immediately, Qin Hao stood up and blocked the two divine generals from the Heavenly Gods' Council. He opened his arms and blocked their path of eliminating Mubai's godhead. He shouted at Commander Mu, "Uncle Mu, let it go. Let it go." Commander Mu was stunned, unable to react. "Amen." Qin Hao nodded. He looked at the two divine generals who were holding the Mubai in the middle and said, "In the past, I didn't have the ability to do anything for the Sword World. Although I didn't want to leave the Heavenly Edict Army to the Sword World, it is a fact that cannot be changed." Mubai felt unbalanced. Perhaps many people in the Sword World felt the same. This was human nature, but Mubai was the only one who said it out loud. Qin Hao should bear the responsibility. He wouldn't run away. The mirror of reincarnation had swept him away, so he couldn't stop even if he wanted to. But now, I have the ability. It's too exaggerated to say that I will bring the Sword World to flatten the Heavenly Edict Divine Realm. However, if there is a chance to take revenge, I will definitely not let it go. Qin Hao flipped his palm, and a dazzling divine radiance appeared. The God King's bone left behind by the God Lord of Infinity appeared in his hand. Wong. The incomparably sacred radiance of the God King radiated. The space faintly resounded with the sound of swords, as if countless immortal swords were flying through the broken heavenly Tao. Looking at the God's bone in Qin Hao's hand, all the swordsmen were stunned. God Lu and Dragon Master clutched their chests, unable to calm down. This is my Lord's God King bone. Exalted God Thundercry, the ruler of the Lightning Bolt continent, exclaimed in shock. That's right. It's the bone of a God King. It's the bone of a God King. The hand bone emanated a pure sword that would not deceive any sword cultivator. Back then, this hand bone was snatched away by Jun Mo. How did it end up in your hands? Lu Qiuxin asked in shock. This was the same question that all sword cultivators had. Since Jun Mo was able to snatch the God King bone from Sword Realm, I can also snatch it back from him. This is the first thing I will do for Sword Realm. Kill Jun Mo. Qin Hao waved his sleeves, and a huge screen was projected. Immediately, the battle between Azura Feng and Luo Feng was replayed in front of the tombs. The sword cultivators saw that the battle was clear and tragic. The scale of the battle was no less than the Battle of Sword Realm back then. It even surpassed Sword Realm. This was because the army of gods from Yun Zhe, Godly Domain, had also joined the battle. Jun Mo and Tamanaji have teamed up. Creak. Zhan Wu clenched his fists, and his body tensed up. As a member of the War God clan, he knew very well what kind of power this represented. However, as the opponent of Jun Mo and Tamanaji on the battlefield, the massacred Godly Domain was also ferocious. Everyone saw a purple gold skeleton that was as strong as a primordial giant fighting a white-haired mad god. The skeleton's eye sockets were burning with soul fire. Every punch it threw turned the void into the path of the underworld. There was a hunchbacked ghost god carrying a huge mountain of corpses on his back. There was endless flesh and blood accumulated on the mountain. It was like a mass of twisted flesh and blood, surrounded by a layer of bloody light. The blood sea was full of heads. The purple gold skeleton was fine, but when they saw Gu-A-D transform into his true form, countless female sword cultivators turned their heads and covered their eyes in fear. They didn't dare to look at him. Before they formed their godly paths, there were ghost stories in a mortal world. It was said that there was a gate to hell, and there were evil spirits and vengeful spirits. These strange folktales had become a terrifying shadow since childhood. However, when they formed their Tianluan and became gods, they didn't see hell or the Azura field, let alone the ridiculous path of the underworld. But at this moment, the sword cultivators saw it for real. The scene was even more terrifying than the folktales. Ghost generals, Shura guards, ghosts, and skeletons carrying swords were fighting fiercely with the army of god guards, and they weren't at a disadvantage. It was simply when the Battle of Shura Foam began. Qin Hao was strictly warned by Shura not to move, so he saw the whole battlefield. Now, he was showing it to everyone. However, as the four godly realms began to struggle, Qin Hao knew that he had to find a chance to defeat Jun Mo. The moment he attacked, the perspective and the projection changed to that of Qin Hao, and there was only one enemy left in the projection. Jun Mo, the godly prince. In the eyes of the sword cultivators, the once domineering Jun Mo had completely changed. His entire body was covered in blood. More and more blood flowed out. From Qin Hao's perspective, the sword cultivators felt as though they were the ones beating up Jun Mo. Countless streams of sword energy flew out, piercing through Jun Mo's body, leaving bloody holes all over. Until the godly king's bone appeared, Qin Hao released the swordsmanship cultivated by the Seamless Academy and resonated with the godly king's bone. He seized control of the bone and finally channeled the power of the swordsmanship into Jun Mo's Tianluan and spirit. Many of the old leaders of the Seamless Godly Realm knelt down and cried at the tomb of the Seamless Godly Master. Jun Mo tried his best to destroy the sword world and snatch the mirror of reincarnation and the godly king's bone from the sword world. However, the sword will entered his body, and his soul and celestial source were pierced by the brutal power of the sword way. This was the true portrayal of retribution. The son of the godly king died under the swordsmanship. The seamless godly master could rest in peace. The heroic spirits buried in the tombs could rest in peace. Master God, did you see? Chusen used the sword to force Jun Mo back. He did it. He defeated the successor of the godly king. Master, Severing Love, Chu San has avenged you. Wuk knelt down in front of Severing Love's tomb. Then, one figure after another knelt down in front of the boundless tombs. Because the swordsmanship didn't have the godly king's Tao, it was freely slaughtered by the godly king's faction. But now, the hard work of the seamless godly master and his expectations had come true. Qin Hao, who used to cultivate in the academy, had personally forced the godly prince, who was almost invincible in the sword world, to retreat and severely injure his spirit. The light screen in the sky slowly dissipated, but the swordsmen kneeling on the ground didn't care. When they saw Jun Mo's godly king armor disintegrate, they knew that Qin Hao had completely dominated him. You actually defeated Jun Mo? Zhan Wu was also very shocked. He looked at Qin Hao in disbelief. Jun Mo used to be an existence that stood high above their heads. He had left a shadow in both Qin Hao and Zhan Wu. Although I didn't see him die with my own eyes, the Emperor of Heaven brought the King of Light to the Massacre World in an attempt to break the curse left behind by the Netherworld King. Then, I can basically conclude that Jun Mo died in the distortion of his divine power and was dismembered by the tyrannical sword will. Qin Hao's tone was full of confidence. If Jun Mo didn't die, the Emperor of Heaven wouldn't have come personally. Moreover, he brought another godly king with him. It was obvious that the Emperor of Heaven was determined to break the curse and drag Qin Hao out of the Massacre World. Brother, Loi burst into tears and threw herself into Qin Hao's arms. The scene fell into a short silence. In the crowd, no one saw a flash of sharpness in Xine's eyes. It was as if Qin Hao had mentioned something that had ignited a ball of fire in his heart. Good job, third year. God Lu stood up from the ground. It was as if he had regained his former glory as the lord of a realm. He was full of energy, and his aura was a few thousand years younger. Jun Mo deserved to die. Long Miao gritted his teeth and said. He silently glanced at the tomb where Long Tian was buried. Beside him, the Dragon Lord was secretly hiding his tears. It was all thanks to my 4 teachers that I was able to defeat Jun Mo. They gave me a chance. Now, the godly king's bone of the sword world should return to its true owner. Qin Hao patted Loi's shoulder and walked towards Wuk with the godly king's bone in hand. Wuk had been chosen as the successor of the sword godly king by the sword world. God Lu and the Dragon Lord had also poured the godly king's Tao of the godly king into his Tianlun. Then, after fusing with the bone, Wuk would inherit the godly king's Tao of the sword godly king. It was very likely that he would reach the peak of the primitive universe in the future. However, when Wuk saw Qin Hao taking the initiative to hand over the sword god king's hand, he shook his head. He stretched out his hand and pushed Qin Hao's hand back. Since you were able to take it back from Jun Mo's hands, it means that this hand bone has acknowledged you. Actually, it already has a true master. In the scene just now, Qin Hao's sword intent resonated and the bone turned into the godly king's sword. It didn't just contain a part of the sword, godly king's Tao of the sword. It was also a chaos divine artifact. Qin Hao needed it. At least, Wuk believed that the bone was far more useful in Qin Hao's hands than in the sword world. Through the scene just now, when he fought with Jun Mo, Wuk saw Qin Hao destroy 2 godly artifacts, including the great void cauldron that had accompanied him all this time. In this world, there weren't many godly artifacts that could withstand the heaven-splitting staff. Qin Hao urgently needed this godly king's sword. Therefore, Wuk couldn't agree to keep it. Chapter 2245. What was a brother? A brother will not impose his personal interests on your gains and losses. He will first consider your situation. This was a true brother. If Wuk accepted the godly king's bone and didn't care about Qin Hao's feelings, then he would only treat Qin Hao as a tool to climb. But your sword Tao doesn't have the godly king's bone. Qin Hao frowned. This had a great impact on Wuk. Yes, that's my sword Tao. Show Wuk's, not the sword god king's. Wuk smiled and patted Qin Hao's shoulder. No matter how strong a Tao intent, Tao technique, or technique was, it only belonged to the previous generation. Future generations could learn and imitate it. Once they fully grasped it, they had to integrate it into their own Tao and create a Tao that surpassed their predecessors. Instead of following the rules rigidly, if Wuk followed the rules, no matter how strong he was in the future, he would at most become a second sword god king. But that wouldn't be the true sword god show Wuk anymore. You have ambition. Dragon Lord praised. Well said, Wuk. We sword cultivators should be like this. Lucio's blood boiled. He was once a peerless genius in the sword world. Before he lost the glazed fan sword spirit, wasn't he also like this? If it were not for the 7-sword mountain of the Kunlun Sea, he would not have given up the profound meaning of the Sword Emperor's 1 sword 7 kills. The reason why Lucio did that back then was to give face to Qin Hao, and secondly, he himself was an extremely outstanding and proud person. Lucio believed that even without the 7-sword wills, he could still cultivate it. This was his confidence and ambition. The current Wuk state of mind was exactly the same as Lucio's state of mind back then. Lucio felt that this might be the reason why he firmly supported Wuk as the god of the sword world. The two of them were actually the same type of people. Shu-san, just take it. This bone is very important to the sword world. Not only does it contain the source of the sword world, but it is also the only thing left behind after Wu Jian's death. Now that it is in the hands of a college disciple, it will be of greater value in the future. It is a fortunate thing, said God Lu. The sword cultivators who came with the group nodded at Qin Hao, indicating for him to accept the divine item from the sword realm. Those sword cultivators who were slightly hesitant finally revealed relieved smiles. Very well, Chu-san, I will accept your offer. Sooner or later, I will use this God King's sword to hang above the collapsed Tianzhou Palace. Qin Hao's divine will moved, and the wisps of sword will on his body began to slowly infuse into the bone in his palm. The bone bloomed with sword light of the great path, and in the dazzling light, it condensed into a shocking sword. From then on, its form was completely fixed. This sword was similar to the Great Void Sword in terms of length and shape. After all, Qin Hao was used to using it. The body of the sword was a blade, and although it had a single edge, it looked sharper. The difference between it and the Great Void Sword was that the end of the God King's sword was in the shape of a hand bone. It looked like a skeletal claw holding a 3-foot-7-inch sword light, which added a bit of awe-inspiring and domineering. What a good sword. By the way, Chu-san, this sword is a gift from the Sword Realm to you. Shouldn't you return it? Dragon Master smiled slyly and said, "For example, the reincarnation mirror." Old dragon, what do you mean? God Lu stared at Dragon Master. He had just taught Mubai a lesson, and Long Ao was also confused. Was he possessed by Mubai, or was his dragon head caught by the door? No, old Lu, don't misunderstand. I don't want the reincarnation mirror. I just want Chu-san to activate the power of the chaotic divine artifact for us to see what's so special about it. If possible, let my son Long Miao, your son Lucio, and a group of talented people in the Sword Realm be nourished by the chaotic divine artifact. Let's see if they can give birth to a few divine meridians. Dragon Master looked embarrassed. However, he and God Lu did know that the reincarnation mirror had the miraculous effect of increasing one's cultivation. Since it was mentioned by Junimo, it was definitely not a lie. That's it. Qin Hao rubbed his nose and said, "Seniors, I actually came back this time with the same intention. Other than bringing Zhan Wu and the others back to the Slaughter Realm, I also want to bring a group of elites from the Sword Realm. With the help of the chaotic divine artifacts, reincarnation dojo, and the innate reincarnation realm force of the ancient Netherrealm, I believe that in 100 years, we will be able to nurture a group of elites. They will become the cornerstone of the Sword Realm." Qin had already discussed this matter with Zhan Wu. Vivian was his wife, Zhan Wu was his brother, and Lu, Tiando, and Zhan Lang were all his trusted aides. They came from the divine wilderness together, and now that they had reunited, they naturally had to follow Qin Hao. In addition, just as Dragon Master said, Qin Hao also planned to bring Long Miao, Lucio, Loi, Li Guangxing, and the others, who were the most talented sword cultivators in the Sword Realm, to the Slaughter Realm. The Slaughter Realm was different from the Sword Realm. The effect of activating the reincarnation field in the ancient Nether Realm was more obvious than in the Sword Realm. In the end, we still ran into each other. I told you to come to the true Dragon Sword Realm to find me. Long Miao laughed happily. He had wanted to cultivate with Qin Hao for a long time, especially now that it was better to leave the Sword Realm. He was not comfortable staying here. Let Long Miao and the others go. As for me, Lucio said bitterly, I'd better not go. After losing his natal sword soul, even though Lucio's heavenly wheel was still there, he was no different from a cripple in the mortal world without a primordial spirit. No matter how high his cultivation was, he was still a cripple. In fact, he was already standing in a different world from the other sword cultivators. Looking at Lucio's lonely face and the unwillingness buried deep in his eyes, God Lu felt very sad. In the past, when Lucio used his glazed sword, almost no one in the Sword Realm could withstand his sword. He hated that damn Junimo for completely destroying Lucio. Even if he was dead now, the scourge was still there. At this time, Azura quietly walked toward Lucio. He raised his arm and gently touched Lucio's forehead with his slender finger. Lucio could not resist. Seeing this, God Lu's face turned pale, and he almost knelt down in fear. Mujan instantly evaporated under this finger. Now that Azura had touched Lucio's forehead, how could he survive? In fact, God Lu was wrong. Just as he knelt down to beg, he saw that Lucio under Shura's fingertips didn't disappear. Instead, a surge of sword intent whizzed out of his body. It was very violent, and the momentum was even stronger than Lucio's peak. This, God Lu's face stiffened. Qin Hao also watched nervously. He knew that Azura would not harm Lucio. He must have discovered something. Because of this, Qin Hao was nervous. Your natal soul was destroyed by the godly king bloodline? Azura asked calmly as he stood face to face with Lucio. Yes, great god Azura. Lucio's forehead was covered in cold sweat. Being attacked by Azura's monstrous slaughter intent, his expression was very painful. His body instantly became numb, as if it was no longer his body. The Azura's abyss-like pupils contracted slightly, and a ball of pitch-black divine light erupted from his fingertip, swallowing Lucio. Following that, countless ghostly figures flew out from the Azura's body, densely packed together, and all of them drilled into the black light that swallowed Lucio. At this moment, Lucio's heart-wrenching scream came out of the black light. An extremely sharp sword soul slashed out of the black light and floated in front of everyone's eyes. This is the glazed sword soul, Dragon Lord exclaimed. How is this possible? God Lu's eyes widened. Lucio's sword soul was destroyed by Jun Mo long ago. But under the stimulation of Azura's slaughter intent, it appeared. Could it be? God Lu's face changed as if he suddenly realized something. He knelt down in front of Azura and begged, Great God Azura, please help Lucio. Please help him. Lucio was too pitiful. He used to be such a genius, but now he was reduced to an ordinary person. Not to mention his family background. No one would even look at him when he walked on the street. Once upon a time, Lucio was the center of attention. Shura shook his head and dispersed the godly power on his fingertips. Lucio fell to the ground, and the glazed fan's sword spirit disappeared. The godly king bloodline is the primordial Tao. What it destroys cannot be restored. At least I cannot. But there are no absolutes in this world. Where there is destruction, there is rebirth. Azura said, Great God, what do you mean? Can my son be saved? The reappearance of the glazed sword soul gave Lucio a glimmer of hope. He didn't want it to be extinguished. At this moment, Azura's gaze shifted towards Qin Hao's position. Chapter 2246. 114 Chinese Network Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation The Sixth Divine Vein Me? Qin Hao was surprised. He shook his head when he noticed everyone looking at him. No, I can't do it. How can I do it when even you can't do it? Be brave. Give yourself some confidence and make the impossible possible, Shura said. Shura said. His encouraging gaze and gentle tone were things that only the Slayers had seen from the young Shura prince. Can I really do it? Qin Hao knew what Shura was referring to, the Edo Tensei. Your friend's natal sword soul is actually not completely destroyed. His divine king bloodline has scattered his form and soul, but in the depths of his sword intent, this weak sword soul is still struggling bitterly, waiting for a chance to regain its vitality. Just now, I try to force it to reform again, but that would cause a great deal of damage. If you use filthy earth to repair it, there's a high chance that it will reform. Azura was once infinitely close to the divine king realm. His senses would not be wrong. So, my son's sword soul is still there, but it's suppressed in the sword will. God Lu clenched his fist excitedly. Yes, his sword will is very tenacious, and his dedication to the sword Tao has never been extinguished. So, you should ask him instead of me. Shura pointed at Qin Hao. Only Qin Hao could help Lucio reform his sword soul without hurting him. After all, the God King bloodline was too destructive, and the Edo Tensei was the only innate power in the Hongmeng Tao that could switch between the Tao of life and Tao of destruction. It was also the strongest Tao of the Nether King. Li Chuji, please. The other princes and princesses of the Lu clan begged. Third. Everyone looked at Qin Hao. God Lu, Dragon Lord, and many famous sword gods were hopeful. Lucio's sword Tao shouldn't end here. He still had a chance to rush to a wider sky. It was up to Qin Hao if he was willing to help Lucio. Lucio was also looking at him eagerly. He couldn't bear to hurt his hopeful eyes. But I failed a total of 51 times in my Edo Tensei. Qin Hao lowered his head slightly with a conflicted expression. How could he not want to help? But just in case, how could Qin Hao not worry about Lucio when he thought of the blood-stained forearms and the ground full of meat paste? If he was not careful, Lucio would die in his hands. His divine soul and physical body have combined. Only his sword soul has withered. Gathering sword soul and Edo Tensei are two different things. You can do it. Promise him. Azura was confident in Qin Hao. Third day, even if there's an accident, I, Lucio, will not hesitate because I really do not want to live like this. I want to pick up the glazed fan sword again. Lucio shed tears. All right, I promise you that I'll help you reassemble your sword soul. Qin Hao strode towards Lucio and stretched out his hand, following which the hands of the two hot-blooded youths that used to hold swords tightly grasped each other. Seeing this scene, Lu Shun let out a long sigh of relief. The stone that had been pressing down on his heart for many years was finally removed. It's a waste to leave such a strong will of the undead here. As the former sword god of the sword world, you must not be willing to be lonely like this. Then, I, Azura, the lord of the slaughter world, the son of Yama, in the name of the undead monarch, summon the souls of the sword world to awaken. Azura slowly raised his palms above his head. The turbulent, murderous aura turned into dense black particles that filled the boundless tombs and shrouded the broken heavenly law. At this moment, under the unique will of the undead monarch of the underworld, the tombstones gradually shook. Just as Lu Shun and Long Ao were filled with horror, a scene that shocked the sword cultivators appeared. Souls floated out from the tombstones one after another. Some were covered in wounds, some were missing limbs, and some only had a head left. There were even some whose faces were blurry and indistinct. They were so fragile that they seemed like they would dissipate at the slightest breath. But even so, the souls of the sword cultivators who had fallen in the battle of the infinite divine realm all took the initiative to stand out. At the front of the endless army that lined up in the void was the infinite divine lord. Father, mother. Luo looked at the unbelievable scene, and the pain of the past turned into tears that flowed out. The other sword cultivators were the same. Looking at the dead elders, relatives, masters, and fellow disciples, they all cried in shock. What a great power to awaken remnant souls and obsessions. Zine looked at the spectacular scene, and the shock in his heart could not be any greater. In fact, most of the undead army in front of them did not have consciousness. The battle 300 years ago had completely shattered them. It was Azura who sensed the strong obsessions in the tombstones and did not hesitate to consume his own divine power to help these remnant souls appear. This was just like the disciples of the Seven Peaks and the Seven Palace Lords of the Divine Palace. Because they died unwillingly, they had too many concerns before they died. And these unwillingly and concerns all turned into obsessions that merged with the broken heavenly path. Azura's perfect wheel of heaven controlled the great path of undead in the underworld. Under his divine power, the sword cultivators' obsessions were separated from the heavenly path and temporarily returned to their former selves. However, some people had suffered too much divine power and their bodies and souls had been destroyed. So it seemed that the obsessions had no faces and their spiritual bodies were also very weak. This is... Qin Hao looked at the tall, infinite Divine Lord. Standing on his left and right were Daisakong, the Celestial Prime, the Blind Sword, the Northern Dipper Celestial Prime, and Dinan. At this moment, Azura's face was slightly pale. With the return of his obsessions, his divine power had been strengthened, so he could use some forbidden techniques. But it was only the strengthening of his divine techniques. His cultivation, skills, and realm had not changed. Moreover, the Azura here was mainly a soul with an evil face and not Azura himself. There was no divine source to support it. Roar. Azura let out a deep roar. His dark eyes were bloodshot, perhaps because he had used too much of his divine power. His palms danced like a windmill, and his will wrapped the sky full of undead, turning into an incomparably sacred sword light. It whistled and soared into the sky, turning around in the 9 heavens and finally falling down on Qin Hao's head. My God! Qin Hao looked up and was stunned. He subconsciously wanted to use the fleet-foot stride to escape. However, his speed was like a snail in the Azura's divine will. Before Qin Hao could even think of escaping, Azura had already guessed his thoughts. He controlled the falling sword light and directly slammed into Qin Hao's body. What are you wailing for? Are you going to die? Xiao Luo cursed angrily at the sky as he dispersed his slaughter Dao insight. His face that was slowly dripping with sweat carried an unconcealable exhaustion. Merely this action had practically emptied half of his divine energy. Chapter 22:47. 114 Chinese Network Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. This parting won't be forever. Sword will howled, and sword chi crisscrossed. The place where Qin Hao stood turned into an absolute sword Dao domain. The gods of the sword world buried here had taught generations of disciples. When they died, their blood spilled all over the ground. After they died, their obsessions gathered into the indestructible will of the Great Path, which Azura poured into Qin Hao's Tianlun. Qin Hao bathed in the light of the Great Path, and the Tianlun on his body became more and more dazzling. The divine veins that symbolize cultivation revolved around the Tianlun. There were 5 in total. The 5th divine vein was originally a hazy light, but as the obsessions of the gods of the sword world poured in, it became more and more real until it completely formed a divine vein. It shone brightly with the other 5 divine veins and revolved around the Tianlun. At this moment, the divine will radiating from Qin Hao was unprecedented. 60,000 years of divine level. Dragon Lord was shocked. Lu Shun also shed tears of excitement. Back then, the 3 divine lords of the sword world, the weakest, Wu Jian, only had 6 divine veins. Qin Hao had been out of the sword world for 300 years. Now, his cultivation was comparable to Wu Jian's. If they fought, even if Wu Jian came back, he might not be Qin Hao's opponent. Wu Jian was a divine lord. Even though he could use the power of a world, his Tianlun was still a grade lower. The gap between the celestial level and the perfect level was not something that could be bridged by the power of a world. Jun Mo only had 30,000 years of cultivation, yet he was able to kill his way through the sword cultivators as he pleased, and no one could stop him. Now, Qin Hao's cultivation was twice that of Jun Mo's. He had 6 divine veins. How terrifying would the power of a perfect Tianlun be? Even Lu Shun and Dragon Lord did not have the confidence to fight him. Was this the effect of the reincarnation mirror? 300 years of cultivation was equivalent to 60,000 years of divine path. No wonder Jun Mo started a realm war to get this item. This chaos divine artifact was too powerful. The sword radiance of the Great Path washed down like the Milky Way. As it continued to merge with Qin Hao's sky wheel, the radiance became smaller and smaller. Throughout the entire process, Qin Hao did not feel a trace of pain. The reason why he had shouted was because he was frightened. Actually, when he was bathing in the sword radiance, the feeling was especially comfortable and warm. It was so warm that Qin Hao wanted to cry. This was because in the baptism of the sword radiance, he could clearly sense the aura of Avicii, the aura of the blind sword, and Daisakong. These once familiar auras seemed to be bidding farewell to Qin Hao for the last time. The second they merged into Qin Hao's sky wheel, they completely disappeared and turned into the 6th divine vein on the sky wheel. There were simply too many sword gods buried in the tombs. Even though they were already dead, they only left behind a wisp of weak will. Compared to their cultivation when they were alive, it was not even 1,000th of their cultivation. However, the number of tombs was huge. The sword, while formed by thousands of wills, was still very majestic. After helping Qin how to manifest the sixth divine vein, there was still a part of the will of the sword that remained. And this part flowed onto the king of God's sword, accompanied by a dazzling explosion of divine light. A simple scabbard was born from the radiance. It contained the shocking sharpness of the king of God's sword within. It was only then that the sword radiance that fell from the sky completely disappeared. I have derived the sixth divine vein. Qin Hao's sky wheel rotated, and the six divine veins circled around. He felt that his body was filled with explosive divine power. And this scabbard had the remnant power of the Avicii divine world on it. It faintly resonated with the broken heavenly path above his head. "Teacher, thank you. You are really too good to me." Qin Hao held the scabbard and landed in front of Azura. Looking at Azura's weak face, he was unable to express his gratitude. "Actually, I should thank you. You are the one who showed me the hope of the revival of the underworld. You are the one who brought back Sha. You're also the one who found a long-lost soul for me." Azura's pale face had a smile. There was no trace of malice mixed in it. It was a sincere smile. No. I should thank you, teacher." Qin Hao bowed. In fact, he really wanted to say that he didn't do anything. Those were all accidents. The Azura's help to him was the real deal. "I have to thank you," Azura said. This pair of teacher and disciple." Dragon Master pointed at Qin Hao and Azura, feeling speechless. Avicii and the others sacrificed everything for the sword world. In death, they helped Chu San open up a divine vein. And this scabbard, God Lu pointed at Qin Hao's hand. From this scabbard, God Lu could faintly sense the presence of Master Mu, Long Tian, and the presence of too many sword gods in the sword world. From today onwards, Avicii and the others were completely gone. Not even a trace of obsession was left. But in the future, the spirits of the sword world would always follow Qin Hao. While witnessing his growth, they would open up a new path with him. They would also remind him to restrain his overly eye-catching edge when necessary. This was actually quite good. Give a name. Azura looked at the God King's sword in Qin Hao's hand. He thought for a moment and said, "You cultivated the unique God-slaying path in my world. Why don't we name it? God-slaying. God-slaying. God-slaying." Qin Hao muttered, "God-slaying sword good. Heaven offering lantern." God Lu shouted at the sword cultivators. Then, sky lanterns lit up in the hands of every sword cultivator. They shone with a sword-like radiance and drifted toward the broken heavenly Tao. The Avicii realm was destroyed. The glory of sword cultivators would never end. They would follow the broken heavenly Tao and illuminate the entire universe. Qin Hao stayed in Jiani City for more than a month. To fulfill Dragon Lord's wish, Qin Hao took out the reincarnation mirror and opened the reincarnation Tao field. He led a large group of sword cultivators into the primordial chaos reincarnation field. Although the reincarnation mirror was an innate divine weapon born at the beginning of the chaos, it still had some limitations. The perfect heavenly wheel could only hold a small number of people, and 100,000 years of cultivation couldn't enter it. Fortunately, apart from Zhang Wu and the others in Wuk, there were no other perfect beings in the sword world. God Lu and Long Ao hadn't reached the limit of 100,000 years of cultivation. Therefore, the two divine lords also entered the reincarnation field to experience it. They felt that it was infinitely mysterious. The sword cultivators who entered the reincarnation Tao field naturally couldn't cultivate as long as Qin Hao. However, because of the reincarnation mirror's uniqueness, the lower one's cultivation, the longer they would experience the reincarnation field. Therefore, the sword cultivators with one divine pulse all benefited greatly after entering. Unless their talent was mediocre, they all experienced the feeling of the divine pulse growing. It was itchy, like an extension of their limbs. It was the same feeling as Qin Hao in the reincarnation field. Among them, The most talented ones even directly evolved the divine pulse after walking out of the reincarnation mirror, gaining 10,000 years of cultivation out of thin air. It had only been a month. God Lu had 80,000 years of divine Tao, and Dragon Lord had 90,000 years of divine Tao. Although this month of reincarnation didn't help them successfully improve their cultivation. However, they did sense the mysteries of the primordial chaos great Tao in the reincarnation field. Following that state, God Lu and Dragon Master were enlightened and had a higher cultivation morality. This would also play a big role in their future cultivation. At the same time, King of the Sword Palace, in front of the palace, Qin Hao bid farewell to the seniors of the Sword World and prepared to return to the God of Massacre Realm. I intend to stay for a while longer, but there are hidden dangers in my body. I can't be willful and carefree. Qin Hao said to God Lu and Dragon Lord, "Don't worry and work hard. The Sword World will always be your shield." When you reach the peak and achieve success, don't forget about the Sword World. God Lu knew that Qin Hao was still threatened by God King Tian Zhao. In particular, Jun Mo had died in the hands of Qin Hao. Under such circumstances, there was hope to turn things around if they desperately became stronger. Otherwise, they would just sit and wait for death. Dragon Lord looked behind Qin Hao. Vivian, Zhan Wu, Zhan Lu, Tian Do, and Zhan Lang, the 4 immortal generals. These 8 perfect divine wheels left the Sword World and followed in Qin Hao's footsteps. Although he was disappointed, Long Ao didn't complain. The 8 perfect divine wheels were Qin Hao's people. Among them were his wife, brothers, and subordinates. As for Lu Qiu and Long Miao, the Dragon Master's gaze swept past the 2 of them, as well as the group that stood beside them. These 50 figures were the blood, sweat, and tears of the Sword Realm. They were the most talented seedlings in the Sword Realm. Not only were Zhan Wu and the others leaving, but Lu Qiu and Long Miao were also leaving with 50 of the top talents of the Sword World. To be honest, I can't let it go. Actually, leaving the Sword World is a good thing. With the guidance of God Shura, the environment of the God of Massacre Realm should make you more motivated. Long Ao's gaze fell on Long Miao. Miao, don't blame the seniors of the Sword World. Their decision was for the good of the Sword World. This may have hurt you in some ways, but from today onwards, you have to stay away from me. Your brother Long Tian is gone. I can't lose you. Child, you must protect yourself. As he spoke, Long Ao, who had always been dignified, actually began to tear up. The ancient underworld was too far away from the Sword World. Dragon Lord didn't want anything to happen to Long Miao. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to save him. Father, I will protect myself. Not only will I do my best, but I will also win glory for the Sword World. I will let the seniors of the Sword World see that I, Long Miao, am still a sword cultivator worthy of their pride. Long Miao kowtowed to Dragon Lord, then stood up stubbornly. Third day, I'll have to trouble you with Lu Qiu, God Lu said. Uncle Lu, don't worry. I will give you a whole Prince Lu Qiu, Qin Hao said. Finally, Qin Hao looked at Wuk and Loi. You really don't want to go to the Massacre Realm with me? You know that I can't leave. Wuk was made the Shinsi of the Sword World and shouldered the hope of the Sword Tao. He had to move forward under the gaze of the entire Sword World. He could no longer be as casual as before. Therefore, he couldn't leave with Qin Hao this time. He couldn't accompany him like before. Qin Hao understood Wuk's situation, but Loi didn't want to go with him. Brother, I'm tired. It's good to guard the Sword World. With such a capable brother, let me be more comfortable and lazy. Loi smiled sweetly. After all, Qin Hao is already so strong. No matter what, she couldn't catch up to Qin Hao's footsteps. Loi was a sword spirit created by the combined efforts of Endless and Dongsheng. She had the bloodline power of the 2 strongest immortal-level experts in the Endless world. However, her excellence was relative. Compared to Qin Hao's perfect heaven wheel, Loi's bloodline talent wasn't strong. Moreover, Qin Hao could even kill the successor of a divine king. He was already standing at the top of the food chain of perfect heaven wheels. It wasn't important whether he had Loi by his side or not. The key was that Lloyd didn't want to be a burden to Qin Hao. She didn't want someone to risk their divine body being penetrated by divine techniques to protect her a second time. This time, Qin Hao's opponents weren't just a few divine masters and divine generals. They were the supreme divine kings. She didn't want Qin Hao to have any worries. She only wanted to guard the sword world and wait for her brother to return. 10,000 years, 100,000 years, 1,000,000 years, she would continue to wait until Qin Hao broke all the shackles and returned victorious. Chapter 2248. In front of the Sword King Palace, Qin Hao bid farewell to Wuk and the other gods of the sword world. He had too much to say to each other since he didn't know when he would return. Shura sat on the stone steps below the palace and silently listened to the conversation. He didn't urge Qin Hao. 50 prides of the sword world were leaving the sword world, so the elders naturally needed to give careful instructions. His gaze swept across the vast training ground of the Sword King Palace. Mubai was hiding behind a pillar-like stone sword. He carefully poked half of his head out and looked at Shura with a complicated gaze. He knew that it was Mujan, but it wasn't Mujan. "Hey, come here." Shura waved at Mubai. Mubai's body trembled slightly. He hurried forward and ran in front of Shura. He bent down and respectfully asked, "Great God Shura, what are your orders?" Shura looked up at Mubai. A tiny figure seemed to flash in the depths of his eyes. It looked like Mubai. However, when he was about to speak, he found that there was nothing he could say to Mubai. He casually said, "I'm thirsty. The slaughter world and the sword world are very far apart. Pour me a cup of tea to moisten my throat." Okay, I'll go now. Mubai nodded repeatedly. He excitedly gestured with his hands. He remembered that his family had brought a top-grade tea from outside the sword world. It was very small, and he couldn't bear to brew it. He happily said, "I'll bring the best tea for you to taste. Lu God City isn't far from Genie City. Wait for me, you must wait for me." Mubai surged with sword energy. He turned into a beam of light and flew into the sky. He disappeared from the heavenly Tao in the blink of an eye and headed towards the former Rikujinji divine realm. He said that Lu God City wasn't far from Genie City, but in reality, they were on 2 different continents. There were more than 100 planes in between. However, if Mujan wanted to drink tea, he had to bring the best tea from the sword world to share with Mujan. Ever since he was born, Mujan had rarely taken the initiative to ask for things from him. Although it had happened once before, that time in Centrocontinent City, Mubai had coldly rejected him. Now that he thought about it, he regretted it very much. This time, he definitely couldn't disappoint Mujan again. "I've done so many things for you. Now I want you to pour me a cup of tea. We're even now." Shura tidied his solemn black robe and turned to walk up the stairs. "Uncle Meng, after a How and I leave, you can return to the Battle God region if you want to. If you like the scenery of the sword world, it's naturally better for you to stay here for a while. However, even if you want to go back, at least leave behind a small team to guard the sword world." Zhan Wu's position in the war god race was different from before. The war god king had no children, so the sons of the city lords all had the chance to enter the war god palace. With Zhan Wu's perfect heaven wheel, he naturally had the highest chance. "Young Master Wu, are you really going to follow that brat from the Senior Pill clan to slaughter the god world?" Zhan Ming actually didn't want Zhan Wu to leave. Even if he left, he should return to the ancestral land and stay beside the divine king to cultivate the honest battle scripture. "I've made a decision, so I won't change it easily." Zhan Wu once gave up his identity as the young city lord and was exiled from the Archean realm with Qin Hao's scattered divine source. Even if he went back, he had to go back with Qin Hao. "All right then, I've gotten used to living in the sword world. I've even started cultivating the sword Tao. My big brother is in front of the divine king's throne, so it doesn't matter if I stay. I'll stay here for a few thousand years before returning to the war god region. I think I'll be a sword god by then, huh?" Zhan Ming laughed as he rubbed his head. God Lu and Dragon Master looked at each other. They didn't doubt this at all. If Zhan Ming's sword Tao was complete, he would definitely be a terrifying big shot in the sword world. "Senior brother, I'm leaving. Qin Hao finally looked at Zine. Along the way, he was indebted to Zine for taking care of him. He was as considerate as an elder brother. Third day. Do you still remember the question you asked me when Kunlun Sea took over the heavenly Tao? Zine asked. I remember. Qin Hao nodded. The death of the Exalted One was a mystery. Zine still hadn't told him. I didn't say it before because you were too weak and too far away from that level. Now, I truly see hope in you. You're starting to move in that direction. I believe that it won't be long before you can personally reveal the answer. Zine waved his hand at Qin Hao. Go. I'll report to Divine Lord Tianyong on your behalf. Follow great god Shura and cultivate in the massacre world. Use the reincarnation mirror well. When you develop 10 divine veins and cross into the primordial realm, you'll know the answer. 100,000 years of the divine path. Qin Hao's expression was solemn as he nodded silently. Lloyd and I will wait for your return in the sword world. The next time we meet, I hope that no one in this world will be able to restrain you. Zine's words had a deep meaning, causing the faces of the sword gods to change. To be able to roam freely in the chaos world, to come and go like the wind. What kind of scenery would that be? There's a small Sumeru heaven in the southern heaven Buddhist world. The realm master is a primordial realm Buddha. His cultivation isn't below mine. His Dharma name is Buddhist sword. He cultivates both Buddhism and the sword. His Vajra sword strength is unparalleled. He's known as the only 2 great Buddhas in the southern heaven Buddhist world. Azura looked at Wuk. Since you aren't willing to cultivate with Ruo Chu, then go to the southern heaven Buddhist world to train. You might have a great opportunity there. After the Battle of the Underworld, Azura was heavily injured and carried to the southern heaven Buddhist world by the Slayers. He knelt down and begged a primordial realm Buddha. Although the primordial realm Buddha didn't help him, he left him with a heavenly secret. There were countless powerful figures in the southern heaven Buddhist world. Many of their Buddhist abhijnas were shocking. Southern heaven Buddhist world, Buddhist sword ancestor. Wuk murmured. Sword radiance flashed in his eyes as he nodded. Thank you for telling me. I'll go to the southern heaven Buddhist world and meet the Buddhist sword ancestor. All right, I'll bring some people along. Dragon Master's spirit was lifted. He had a younger brother who abandoned the dragon race and entered Buddhism. This trip was a good opportunity to find his brother. Qin Hao nodded at Wuk. The 2 of them left the divine wilderness continent together. Now, they each found their own great Tao. Their Taos were no longer the same, and they couldn't travel together. But he believed that they would meet again at the highest peak in the future and look at the myriad worlds with a smile. Teacher, let's go. Azura silently looked up at a certain direction in the sky. Seeing that there was no abnormal movement, he nodded, Let's go. With a wave of his hand, a mass of turbulent divine light rolled up. Wrapped in pitch-black slaughter particles, everyone seemed to have condensed into a black tornado, rising up from the front of the Sword King Palace, whistling as they flew out of the heavenly law. Brother, I'll wait for you to come back. Loy shouted at the black tornado. The tears that she'd been holding back finally flowed down. Wuk, Zine, God Lu, Dragon Master, and the gods of the sword world all silently sent off the tornado with blessings. Although Qin Hao wasn't from the sword world, he inherited the will of the sword world, just like Wuk. Everyone watched silently for a long time. At this time, when Qin Hao and the others left the sword world, a sword radiance frantically shuttled through the various planes in the sword world of the Great Tao. In the sword radiance, Mubai held a jade teapot tightly in his arms. The exquisite spout of the teapot was emitting spirals of immortal mist. He moved towards Jiani City with excitement. He silently muttered, I found it. I brought the best tea. Mujan, wait for me. The black divine light roared and shot out of the sword world's light. In an instant, it disappeared into the vast starry field. Lu Qiu, Long Miao, Li Guangxing, and the 50 most talented sword cultivators of the sword world were in the will of Azura's divine path. The scenery in their perception turned into extreme afterimages. They were frantically moving backward. They felt as if they were surrounded by a black tunnel. All they could see was a dazzling light. This speed could no longer be measured by ordinary divine path. It's simply too fast. If we weren't protected by Senior Azura's divine will, the raging wind alone would be enough to tear us apart in an instant. Senior, is this the Divine King's divine escape technique? Li Guangxing asked in horror. Qin Hao smiled and glanced at Azura. In fact, he also wanted to know if Azura's strength had returned to its peak after finding the soul of infatuation. I'm still far from a divine king. They are innate, primordial Tao spirits that condense their thoughts to become gods. It could even be said that they themselves are a part of the wilderness. No gods can stand in the light of a divine king. If I were a divine king, you would have been dead long ago. Azura explained calmly. Only a divine king could travel with a divine king. Teacher, could it be that you haven't returned to your peak state? Qin Hao asked in surprise. Even if Azura wasn't a divine king, wasn't he known as the divine lord that was closest to the divine king? Fusing with the soul of infatuation is only a part of my divine soul. It gave me an additional sensory ability. It can improve my cultivation and level. Azura had indeed not returned to his peak state. After all, he only had half of his divine soul. His main soul and other secondary souls were still in the Azura Palace, bound by the iron of the King of Hell. Whether he could return to his peak state or not, he would have to return to his peak state. How's little Han? Is there any news about her? At this moment, Vivian asked Qin Hao. A hint of disappointment flashed across Qin Hao's face. He shook his head. Little Han was taken away by the great elder of the Moon Flow clan at the 97th level of the Glory Recapture Divine Realm. With my current strength, I'm afraid I can't step foot into the Moon Flow clan at the 97th level of the Glory Recapture Divine Realm. The Moon Flow clan's position in the Glory Recapture Divine Realm was very strong. They were firmly in the third place. There were only 2 god clans above them. The highest level was most likely divine, King Zhonghua. Moon Flow clan? Azura frowned slightly. Did you offend them? No, but my wife is the granddaughter of the Moon Flow clan's great elder. That senior doesn't like me. Qin Hao's face turned ugly. Moon Flow clan's great elder Yu Shintian? That's normal. That brat only befriends experts. Moreover, his strength is not ordinary. Azura had heard of Yu Shun Tian's godly title before. How does he compare to you, teacher? Qin Hao asked curiously. Shanji was the strongest person in the primeval world below the divine kings. He had comprehended the primordial great Tao and had reached the limit of the divine master realm. Azura could defeat Shanji by fusing the evil and wisdom aspects. This meant that when Teacher was at his peak, Shanji was indeed a peerless god with half a foot in the Divine King realm. Then, between Azura and Yu Shintian, who was stronger? Of course it's me. Azura was very conceited about this. Although I don't know what level Yu Shintian is at in this world, I should be the only person who can squeeze half of his body into the Divine King realm. Other than that, the current Divine King of Light was also a postnatal life form. However, the Divine King of Light's entire body was covered in the light of a Divine King. Phew! Qin Hao let out a sigh of relief. From the looks of it, Yu Shintian is indeed inferior to Teacher. In the Divine Master Great Tao, he is practically invincible. When Lucio heard this, she seemed to have something to say, but Long Mian glared at her. Long Mian knew what Lucio wanted to say. Azura had defeated Shanji in front of the tombs. Everyone had seen it through the screen of light that Qin Hao had released. But compared to God, Lord Tianho, Azura was clearly a little weaker. After all, Shanji had been able to struggle in Azura's hands. But in front of God, Lord Tianho, even resisting was an extravagant hope. Tianho had even ignored Shanji. Of course, if they said this directly, they would be disrespectful to Azura. Azura was too confident in his boldness. As juniors, Lucio and Long Mian would be better off not slapping his face. The place they were about to go was Azura's lair. When they thought of the evil ghosts, skeletons, and the Azura guards wielding cold scythes, Long Mian, and Lu Qiu felt their scalps go numb. Bzzz. The black tornado suddenly stopped, and the surging particles immediately scattered. Azura's sudden stop caused a long line of Sword World juniors behind him to crash into the people in front of him. Fortunately, Qin Hao reacted quickly enough. He tightly hugged Vivian, and with the help of his divine power, he was able to prevent himself from being thrown out of Azura's way. "Teacher, what's wrong?" He had not stopped for no reason, and this was especially true for the God Lord of the Slaughter World, the synonym of the Death God, the Azura God. "Give me the mirror of Samsara." Azura extended a hand to Qin Hao. Qin Hao's palm flashed with divine light. Before Azura had even formed the mirror of Samsara, he already knew the answer. Whoosh! The dazzling light of the great Tao erupted, instantly engulfing the myriad worlds. This light seemed to drown out the great desolate realm. At the same time, the massive image of an ancient god holding a divine seal slowly emerged from the dazzling light. In its other hand, it dragged the long heaven splitter. If you like Primordial Alchemy Venerate, please bookmark. Primordial Alchemy Venerate's new book page updates the fastest. Chapter 2249. Junmo's death in the bathtub in Yunzhe's sacred realm was actually caused by Qin Hao. The deity king's bloodline was formed from the essence of primordial chaos. What kind of power was able to twist it? In this world, only the ancient underworld's innate king of hell possessed such a unique Tao of transformation. However, the innate king of hell was already dead and the tainted earth was no more. And now, it had reappeared in Qin Hao's hands. Deity King Tian Zhao had no choice but to take this seriously. The slaughter realm was cursed and Tian Zhao couldn't enter it. Thus, he had no choice but to send people in his sword realm in an attempt to obtain answers from Zhang Wu and the 8 perfect Tianlun experts. Lu Shen allowed Zhang Wu and the others to leave with Qin Hao because of this. Sword realm was too weak. Even if Tian Wu God had set up a boundary marker, it was only a paper. Sword Realm's foundation was far weaker than the Slaughter Realm and Huang Quan realms. After all, they were once a deity king's faction, and a starving camel was still bigger than a horse. However, neither God Lu nor Qin Hao would have thought that an innate deity king would wait for them on their way back and kill them with his own hands. And yet, deity King Tian Zhao did it. At this moment, the endless Tao's divine light shrouded the entire universe, as if this was the only light left in the world. This light was too sacred and powerful. The innate deity king's primordial chaos aura had an innate pressure on all living beings. Lu Qiu, Long Miao, Li Guangxing, and the others all covered their foreheads with their hands. Their eyes were half opened, and their facial features were all twisted. They couldn't even open their eyes. In fact, if not for Shura standing in front of them with his body surging with dense black particles, everyone even suspected that they would have been killed by the radiance on deity King Tianzhao's body. Even so, the light still penetrated through the black fog around the Azura and landed in the line of sight of Lu Qiu and the others. Their eyes were like sieves that were riddled with holes. Everything they saw was a hole pierced by the light. What kind of power is this? Is it from a deity king? A small swordsman with 2 divine veins and a heavenly wheel that was only at the divine level felt that his soul had become transparent under the radiance. Don't look at him, and don't use your sword intent to sense the power within the radiance. Protect your sword heart and sword soul. After all, Lu Qiu was once the pride of the sword world. His sense of danger was extremely strong. He instantly realized how terrifying the situation was. That's right. That's the godly king, the ruler of the wilderness. Li Guangxing bellowed. The heavenly wheel bloomed, and the sword will all over his body circulated around the heavenly wheel. He listened to Lu Qiu's instructions and began to close his eyes to protect his spirit. The others followed suit. In an instant, the 50 sword cultivators, as well as those from War Tower, Celestial Dipper, and Zhang Lang, all released the power of their laws in an attempt to find shelter from the Divine King's radiance. However, even though they had closed their eyes, they were still unable to avoid the God King's radiance. More and more sweat flowed down their bodies trembled, and their complexions grew paler. Heaven's edict. Azura's long black hair fluttered in the wind. He stood alone in front of the resplendent and massive ancient god. No matter how Heaven's edict's radiance swept over him, he remained unmoved in the torrent. He was like a pitch-black boulder. Why didn't you leave a large number of troops outside the slaughter world? Because I know very well that you will return to the sword world sooner or later. I have been waiting here for a long time. God King Skyorder held his God King seal in one hand and the Sky Splitter in the other. He was bare-chested, looking like an ancient god that had come from ancient times. The strange brass-colored tattoo on his lower body shone with a blinding light, exuding a boundless wildness and dominance. Heaven's Edict Divine King army was stationed in the Sword World. Unfortunately, Heaven's Edict Divine King had set up a boundary. Heaven's Edict Divine King did not want to meet Heaven's Edict Divine King army, nor did he want to clash with Heaven's Edict Divine King army. Thus, he, a Divine King, was hiding here, waiting for Qin to come out of the Sword World. If news of this spread out and entered the ears of the other deity kings, they might laugh at him. However, this place was the best way to capture Qin Hao, because here, no one could stop him. Be it War Deity King or Tianwu Deity, they couldn't find an excuse to stop him. Firstly, he didn't kill War Deity King's descendant. Secondly, he didn't step on Tianyang's boundary tablet. If the two appeared, it wouldn't be Heaven's Edict's problem anymore. It would be War Deity King and Tianyang who provoked him. Then, the Deity King Banquet's arbitration wouldn't fall on Heaven's Edict, but War Deity King and Tianyang. So be it if they wanted to laugh at him. After all, it wasn't proper for a Deity King to ambush someone. Compared to figuring out how Qin Hao was going to reverse Junmo's Deity King bloodline, the latter was more important. This wasn't a matter of taking Qin Hao's life. The evil energy had already threatened the Deity King's ruling position. Heaven's Edict believed that even if the other Deity Kings knew about this, they would silently allow him to do so. After all, none of the innate Deity Kings would allow postnate living beings to threaten them, let alone Daos that surpassed them. Teacher, what should we do? Qin Hao hugged Vivian tightly, trying his best to block out the terrifying Deity King's light as he looked at Shura's back. Not long ago, Qin Hao had witnessed a Deity King's attack. Under the light, everything was lost, as if there were no other Daos in this world. To Qin Hao, it was an existence he couldn't fight against, and he could only rely on Shura. If my main soul was here, it wouldn't be a problem to merge with me. But now it's very troublesome. Shura gripped the reincarnation mirror tightly. How troublesome! Qin Hao's heart sank upon hearing Shura's words. Do you think it's easy to help you form the sixth divine vein? It's already difficult for my main body to escape from Tian Zhao's hands. Not to mention, my soul consumed too much energy. I'm afraid I won't be able to activate the reincarnation mirror in time. Shura had fought with a real Deity King before. He knew how powerful a Deity King was. Just like how Qin Hao felt when he felt the power of light. Under the primordial chaos Dao, will, there was almost no Daos in this world unless they were on the same level. Hence, the moment Shura activated the reincarnation mirror, they might have already died in Tian Zhao's hands. A Deity King didn't even need to do anything. Just a glance or psyche would be enough to kill them. So we're dead for sure. Qin Hao's heart thumped heavily. Vivian also nervously grabbed Qin Hao's hand. If this was fate, she would be lucky to die together with Qin Hao. No, you're dead for sure, but I'm not. Shura turned around and smiled at Qin Hao. There was no gentleness or kindness in his smile. It was filled with malice. He had touched the edge of the primordial chaos. He wouldn't die so easily in the hands of a Deity King. Just like back then, he would at most have his soul shattered again. But Tian Zhao wanted to kill Shura. 1 strike and 2 strikes was still not enough. Hence, Qin Hao would die. Shura would at most be severely injured, and he would be able to reform his soul again in the future. This was how miraculous the Xiang Sha Dao was. Are you done with your last words? Tian Zhao's face turned gloomy. His golden eyes stared at Shura, and he said, Shura, you were lucky to have survived the war between light and dark. You should cherish your Dao of slaughter. The underworld also needs a god to rule over it. Hand that brat to me. Tian Zhao raised the sky splitter and pointed it at Azura's back. He continued, hand him over and I won't punish you. As for those little bugs from Sword World, every debt has its debtor. I only want him. This was Tian Zhao's bottom line, the last bit of dignity an innate deity king had left. Teacher, Princess Sha still needs me to reincarnate. Qin Hao's forehead was drenched in cold sweat, and he quickly said, what are you shouting for? I didn't promise him anything. Shura said in disdain. This brat finally backed down for once. Upon hearing this, Tian Zhao's golden eyes turned gloomy. The Hong Huang needs the underworld. I don't want to kill you, but don't force me to. Tian Zhao, you are an innate deity king. Don't you have any sense of shame? Zhan Wu stepped out and shouted, his voice rumbling like a bell. Brat from the war god race. After I take care of the ant that killed Junimo, you'll be next. Tian Zhao's ancient god shadow roared. He would stop the evil calamity from rising and nip it in the bud. Naturally, he would not neglect the source of the evil energy. Hence, these 8 perfect Tianlun were very important. Don't worry, I will not kill you. Other than War, God King's descendant, the 7 of you swear to serve me. Not only will I spare your lives, I will also nurture you. The primordial world was only controlled by the immemorial heavenly Tao. Back then, even the 5 innate deity kings couldn't control it. Now, the Hong Huang was about to give birth to a second primordial world. Tian Zhao would have it firmly in his hands, and it would become the ancestral land of the Tian Zhao celestial race. We swear to follow Dendi to the death. Voila! Zhan Lang, Yufeng, and the others knelt before Qin Hao and drew their weapons. Zhan Lu glanced at Zhan Wu and murmured, it seems like I don't have to die. He was brought up by Zhan Wu. Although he wasn't a member of the war god race, he cultivated the Wu Wang battle scripture since young. Thus, he could be called war god king and deity ancestor. It's not that I don't want to help you, but this thing is too strong. Tian Do looked at Tian Zhao, celestial king, with a bitter expression. His vulgar words almost angered Tian Zhao to death. You want to be a traitor? Zhan Lang suddenly turned around, blade intent brewing in his eyes. If Tian Do surrendered to Tian Zhao, he wouldn't hesitate to cut him down. Gulp. Heaven Do swallowed his saliva in the face of the 4 divine generals' unfriendly gazes. Thinking of his younger brother, Sheng Hui, who was left in the divine wilderness, he suddenly let out a strange cry. He raised his hand and grabbed, condensing a sharp golden spear. He jumped and jumped at the huge shadow of the ancient god. You want me to surrender? Who do you think you are? Come, kill me. Losing was not shameful. He couldn't stand being looked down upon. Zhan Lang and the others' gazes were already an insult to him. He, Tian Do, was once an outstanding godly general in the Daqin Empire. Although Qin Hao later took control of the heavenly Tao, he had no choice but to submit to him. However, he didn't give up. He cultivated like crazy, trying to understand some damn Tao. He worked hard to become as strong as Qin Hao and then surpass him. He also tried to become the ruler of the heavenly Tao. How glorious would that be? However, Tian Do found that he was wrong. His efforts were all in vain. Before he had become a god, he was practically invincible. He had only fought to a draw with Wuk once. In the end, he had become a god. From the divine wasteland continent to the great wasteland myriad world with lofty aspirations, he realized that he could not defeat anyone. Anyone in the sword realm could beat him up. Later, he learned about cultivation from God Lu. It turned out that the sword cultivators he fought were all stronger than him. God Lu even said that it was for his own good and that it was to train him. In short, it was too uncomfortable. If that was the case, what was the use of the celestial Tao? He couldn't defeat the Sword World's elders, God Lu, and even Long Yao. Now, there was this deity king. What was a deity king? Tian-Do didn't know. Since he couldn't defeat him, what was the difference between dying in the deity king's hands and dying in the hands of other Tianluan? After thinking it through, Tian-Do's mind suddenly became clear. He felt that he had nothing to fear anymore. You simply deserve to die. God King Tian-Zhao was so angry that his lungs were about to explode. His short hair stood on end, as if his head was filled with spikes. Since the birth of the chaos world, be it innate deity kings or postnate living beings, no one dared to point at him and say, "Who do you think you are?" He didn't know where Tian-Do's courage came from, but Tian-Zhao deity king was really angry. It was only now that Tian-Zhao deity king felt the anger of an ant. Even when Jun Mo died, he didn't feel this way. The golden light in his eyes turned hollow, and an indescribable primordial was swept out. Tian-Zhao's eye sockets seemed to contain two primordial worlds. The will swept out and grabbed Tian-Do's soul, as if it was trying to drag him into the light in his eye sockets. At this moment, Tian-Do, who was jumping around, was stunned as if he had lost his soul. Even the light wheels around his body disappeared. So King strong. Tian-Do's last bit of consciousness felt his body rotting away like dust, silently rotting away and returning to zero. Let's hope it works. When Tian-Zhao released the primordial Tao, Shura also made his move. Chapter 2250. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. The deity kings will swept over, and Tian-Do felt like a pair of eyes of the future was opened in his mind, able to predict what would happen next. It was a miraculous feeling, indescribable with words, but everything was happening according to the predetermined path, as if it was fate. Tian-Do didn't know if Tianluan was a god or not, but he knew that the figure standing in the light was a true god. Qin Hao hugged Vivian tightly as the immense pressure crushed Shura from the front and headed straight for Tian-Do. Under the pressure, Tian-Do lost control of his body, leaving him with only his mind to watch helplessly. It took him a lot of effort to turn his head around, only to see Tian-Do turning into light dots. He didn't even have the chance to scream or run. This was an innate deity king. The first time he saw a deity king in action through the Slaughter World's heavenly Daos, he had the protection of the realm force and dark incantation. But this time, under the deity king's will, Qin Hao realized how tiny he was. Even Ji Jie would be like a helpless toddler in front of such power, let alone him. Shura held the reincarnation mirror in one hand, unleashed his godly power, and his black hair grew longer and longer. When he swung his hair, it was dragged a few feet behind him. Shura let out a deep roar. Particles billowed in the air, and light wheels bloomed. His other hand slammed onto the reincarnation mirror's back with the godly power of slaughter. From the mirror's surface, a dark torrent emerged and enveloped everyone behind him, forming the Tao of reincarnation. It was only then that the will suppressing Tian-Do's body disappeared. The light dots flowing out from his body stopped, and he fell to the ground, sweating profusely as if he just went through a deadly ordeal. Wong. The dark torrent turned into the godly light of slaughter. Shura guided the power of Tao of reincarnation released by the chaos divine weapon and forcefully pulled Tian-Zhao deity king's will back towards him. Tian-Zhao, god king, sensed that the will he had released had been imprisoned by another powerful force. Even though it had not severed its connection with him, it could not break free. Soon after, he sensed that the will that could wipe out all life was coming back at him. The mirror of reincarnation was indeed a chaos divine artifact. Tian-Zhao's brows furrowed slightly, but they immediately relaxed again. The Tian-Zhao God King seal in his hand trembled, and an extremely bright ball of light flashed out. It also gathered into a torrent that surged out and collided fiercely with the black torrent. Boom! The universe seemed to shake and collapse. Looking from the periphery of the battle, The hundreds of flickering continents near the Shura and the Heavenly Edict, as well as the fragments of continents, were all reduced to nothingness by this collision. Blood overflowed from the corner of Azura's mouth, and tiny cracks appeared on the reincarnation mirror in his palm. When he breathed, his chest seemed to be burning with a flame of God. Even if he took a small breath, it hurt him so much that he trembled all over. This reincarnation mirror, indeed, contains a trace of primordial intent. Jun and Mo didn't misjudge it. Unfortunately, your ability is still lacking. The divine light on Tian Zhao's body was still dazzling, but his opponent Shura's halo was quickly dimming, and his aura began to weaken. After this exchange of blows, the outcome was clear. Take them and return to the Sword Realm immediately, quick. Azura swung his arm backward, and the reincarnation mirror flew toward Qin Hao and landed in Qin Hao's palm. Teacher, Qin Hao looked at Azura's lonely back, and the hand holding the reincarnation mirror trembled violently. A strong sadness surged from the bottom of his heart, and the entire void was infected by his sadness. Was he going to escape again? The first time he escaped, the infinite divine realm was destroyed, and the divine master infinite died for him. It was the same in front of him. Are you sad for me? Are you worried that I will die? Azura slowly turned his head, and his eyes were no longer cold, and became incomparably clear. At this moment, he seemed to see his past self in Qin Hao's eyes. When Sha died, he also had the same expression. Guilt, self-blame, despair, and hatred. He hated his enemy. He also hated himself. But Qin Hao and he were not related, and they became master and disciple by chance. Qin Hao was not like him, who watched his sister die, so why was he still so sad? He was the god of death, who only brought slaughter and death to the world. A person who shed tears for the god of death. How strange. Teacher, Qin Hao shook his head at Azura. His throat was swollen, and it was especially painful. Azura, who was feared by the entire massacre world, was actually gentle in his eyes, just like senior brother Eastern Sky. They were both so kind, sincere, righteous, and brave. Don't dawdle. Don't worry, I won't die because I am Azura. Azura smiled. After being bound by the Hell King's metal for countless years, the rusted divine metal had grown together with his body. It was not easy to gather all of his soul today. But at this moment, when he felt Qin Hao's sadness, he felt that it was worth it. Let's go. The Sword World has the boundary stone of Heaven Yong, and there is a group of divine guards from the War God King. They will also provide you with protection, so why are you reluctant to leave me? Let's go. My temporary disappearance is because I don't want to see you die. I know that fate will not send Sha back again. Also, you are my disciple. Azura had never taken in a disciple. The ice-cold god of death did not need anyone to speak for him, but he still taught Qin Hao, letting Qin Hao understand that death was the meaning of survival. Maybe he did not teach him well, but Qin Hao shouldered the hope of the netherworld. Even if Azura really died in the hands of Tian Zhao, there would be another god of death in the future of the Chaos World, a god of death who had the chance to be stronger than him. As he urged, Azura changed. His weak aura was forcefully suppressed, and it went against the flow. It was as if he was burning his soul power at all costs. His body became bigger, and the body formed by black smoke tore his black robe apart. 6 strong arms stretched out from the black smoke, and each hand held a sickle that symbolized death. His head split into 2, and 2 faces appeared. One was the face of Ji Xiang, and the other belonged to Muzhan. Ji Xiang's face was filled with wisdom, while Muzhan's face was filled with stubbornness. Evil, Ji, and Qi. Their expressions were all different. Qin Hao looked at the changes in Azura. Was this the true form of the god of death? Guad, Netherworld, and Umo all had their true forms. The monster with 6 arms and 3 faces in front of him was the god of Azura. No, it was far from it. Light killed Ming, but did not break the way of Ming. Your stubbornness will make the way of Ming disappear from the Chaos World. The God King seal in Tian Zhao's hand lit up again. Under the flowing light, the stars in the sky appeared in the God King's seal, like a miniature of the chaos world, exuding supreme power. Breaking the way of Ming was not Tian Zhao's wish. The chaos world needed the support of the way of Ming. However, Azura's stubbornness had stimulated Tian Zhao's wildness. So many god kings in the ancient god era could fall, so it did not matter if he broke the way of Ming himself today. Tian Zhao did not care whether the chaos world collapsed or not. At least there was still the Archean world standing tall, and maybe there was a second original realm hidden. Boom! Vast divine light surged out of Tian Zhao's body like a gust of wind blowing through the chaos world, and condensed into a huge palm. The light flowed, and the palm was bigger than the six-armed, three-faced Azura. Then it slammed down heavily, and all the darkness was crushed in the palm. Bang! There was a deafening roar, and the sweeping God King's will of Wei shook Qin Hao's spirit, and his soul was about to be shaken out of his body. He grabbed the reincarnation mirror and infused it with divine power. His telekinesis covered everyone in the sword world, and they did not dare to look at the Azura under the giant palm. They gritted their teeth and prepared to escape. However, at this moment, Qin Hao suddenly stopped the infusion of divine power. He felt that the Azura's aura was still there, and he hurriedly turned around. He saw that in the terrifying giant palm, there was a ball of green divine light that pierced through the fingers, tearing it apart bit by bit. Then, there was another roar, and the God King's palm that crushed the heavens collapsed. So powerful. Wei Wei, who was in his arms, was stunned. At this moment, everyone saw that two figures slowly appeared in the scattered palm light. The Azura was still waving his six arms, and he was unscathed. Beside him stood a Taoist with a jade crown on his head. He had white hair and a white face. His clean immortal robe fluttered gently, outlining his slender figure. His ruddy face was 30% majestic and 70% noble, and people could not help but think that he was a Khanate absolute saint. This Taoist had his hands in his sleeves, and he held a Taoist dust in his arms. He was looking at God King Tian Zhao in the dazzling light with a faint smile. His expression was ethereal, and only a small branch the length of a finger grew above his head. A green leaf grew on the branch, and there was an inexplicable sense of joy. If one did not look closely, they would have thought that the leaf was a jade ornament. Qin Hao glanced over and was left dumbfounded. Looking at this aura, as well as the legend of the primeval realm saying that there was a leaf growing on one's head, he immediately knew who this person was. It was God Ancestor Qing Hua, one of the Archean realm's four kings. Qing Hua, God King Tian Zhao murmured, and he could not help but frown. Azura also silently looked at the immortal standing beside him. With his experience, he naturally knew who this immortal was. He was a Khanate absolute saint who had awakened at the same time as God King Yama, and it was natural for him to thank him. But Azura did not understand why this immortal would save him. This place was separated from the Archean realm by countless galaxies, and it was impossible for this immortal to just pass by. Obviously, this immortal was here on purpose, just like God King Tian Zhao. God Ancestor Qing Hua felt the cold Azura and sighed helplessly. This immortal did not even thank him. He had crossed the untainted land to come here, and the people of the underworld were indeed heartless. God King Tian Zhao, how have you been? Now is not the time to blame Azura. So God Ancestor Qing Hua took the initiative to greet God King Tian Zhao with the Taoist dust in his arms. I thought that Tian Wu and Zhan would help, but I never thought that the last one would be you, who had nothing to do with this. Qing Hua, do you really want to be my enemy? God King Tian Zhao took the initiative to disperse the huge divine light, because the primordial pressure was useless in front of an opponent who was also a God King. If he kept shining, God Ancestor Qing Hua would laugh at him in his heart. I'm just passing by. How can I be your enemy? God Ancestor Qing Hua shook his head. This was a big hat to wear. Their Qinghua Mountain was a natural cultivator, and since the untainted land was created, they had always stood aloof from worldly affairs. Passing by, God King Tian Zhao's eyes suddenly widened, and then he slowly retracted them, frowning even more. Passing by to save Azura? Did he think that God King Tian Zhao had become a God King by cultivating the stupid path? Chapter 2251. Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. There were more than 9,000 worlds between the Archean realm and here. How could there be such a coincidence? Even God Ancestor Qing, Hua himself, couldn't convince himself. Of course, excuses and reasons were two different things. Excuses could be made up as much as one wanted. Our Qing Hua Mountains cultivation is based on the nature of Tao. Tian Zhao, you should know the importance of the dark Tao. The Archean wilderness can't afford any more troubles. God Ancestor Qing Hua sighed. Qing Hua, do you know that Jun Mo is dead? Tian Zhao's expression turned solemn. He knew that the Archean wilderness needed the support of the dark Tao, and he never wanted to kill Shura. He only wanted to kill Qin Hao. Was it too much to ask for his father to avenge his son? Tian Zhao, you and I are both born in the chaos. As innate deity kings, we have seen the Archean wilderness go through so much. Can't you see through the Tao of karma? God Ancestor Qing, Hua didn't want an innate saint like him to be trapped by the mortal world. Deity King Tian Zhao's lips twitched, and he swallowed back the words he wanted to say. He knew that everything started because of Jun Mo, and it should end because of Jun Mo. He recalled a hunt in the past. Due to his selfish desire to protect his son, he did something that went against the dignity of a divine king. He sent his subordinate, Hong Xiao, to barge into the venerated Pill clan to capture a youth. He didn't care about the dignity of the divine king of war and exiled him from the primeval realm along with a member of the divine war clan. And now, because of Jun Mo, he, the son of Tao spirit, was arrogant and despotic. He destroyed the saint spirit world, destroyed the sword world, and even wanted to break the nether Tao. Jun Mo ignored the iron rules set by the divine kings and led the heavenly edict army to leave corpses everywhere they went. Now, the Thousand Saint Dragon Palace, Zhan Shun clan, Gu Ming realm, and even a newly awakened primordial supreme, Tianwu God, were all involved. It seemed that the imperial edict was very easy, but in reality, Jun Mo had stirred up waves one after another, causing him to bear a lot of pressure. However, Jun Mo was his son after all. The Tao spirit that he had wholeheartedly devoted himself to creating, the illustrious divine prince of the heavenly mandate divine realm, was gone just like that. Alas, God Ancestor Qing Hua saw the expression on deity King Tianchao's face and knew how conflicted he was. Qing Hua, you can help him now, but you can't help him forever. Today I can stop, but it won't end just like this. Tian Zhao deity king glanced at Qin Hao between God Ancestor Qing Hua and Azura. Then he turned around and took a step forward. A deep black hole appeared in the void. He grabbed the sky-splitting rod and stepped into it. The black hole closed, and the oppressive aura of Tian Zhao deity king disappeared. Ancestor Qing Hua cultivated the great Tao of nature and followed the laws of nature. Since the other party had interfered, he would definitely persist. Tian Zhao and Qing Hua were both part of the four kings of the ancient realm and had some friendship during the ancient god era. Tian Zhao didn't want to fight with Qing Hua. The withdrawal of the imperial edict was only to give Qing Hua some face. It did not mean that the imperial edict had completely given up. If there was a chance in the future, Tian Zhao would still make a move. The matter that he wanted to pursue must have a result. On this point, Jun Mo had completely inherited God King Tian Zhao's nature. Thank you for your help, Ancestor. I am very grateful. Qin Hao took Vivian's hand and followed Tian Zhao back. They came to God Ancestor Qing Hua and bowed to him. Greetings, Ancestor Qing Hua, from the Sword World. Lucio and the others bowed together. They had never seen God Ancestor Qing Hua before, but he could talk to the deity king and persuade Tian Zhao deity king to leave. Thinking of the battle in the infinite divine region, when the immortals of Qinghua Mountain took the martial god away, Jun Mo didn't dare to stop them. They knew that this Taoist was important. I just did it. Don't worry about it. It's not a good place to stay. Let me send you on your way. God Ancestor Qing Hua smiled kindly and looked at Azura. Azura dispersed his 3 faces and 6 arms and returned to his normal appearance. His face was cold, and he didn't speak or refuse. In order to help Qin Hao develop the 6th holy pulse, he guided the power of billions of souls of the Sword God, which consumed a lot of energy. And just now, he took a blow from Tian Zhao deity king. Without the support of the divine source, the 3 souls were already very weak. In fact, they didn't have the extra strength to take Qin Hao and the others back to the slaughter world. Let this old Taoist send them on their way. Thank you, Ancestor, Qin Hao and the others said in unison. God Ancestor Qing Huan nodded and smiled. He lifted the dust Taoist and swept it. A green light danced with the leaves and surrounded the people. Suddenly, the place was full of divine light. With a flash, the light wrapped the people and disappeared into thin air. When the light reappeared, they had arrived at the desolate and ruined ancient nether region. At this time, Tian Zhao, who had to give up on his mission because of God Ancestor Qing Hua's intervention, was sitting alone in a tavern in a small plain of the divine world. Like an ordinary cultivator, he ordered 2 jars of strong liquor and a few dishes. Then, he sat there and drank, looking very lonely. You can't even see through the way of karma? God Ancestor Qing Hua's words were still ringing in his mind. Tian Zhao's sharp eyes flashed with a touch of confusion. The Divine King should have the Tao realm of the Divine King. Not to mention the karma between Qin Hao and Jun Mo, he could even see through the karma between the Divine King. In the past, Jian and Ming were good friends. Jian challenged Light, but was defeated and killed. Later, Ming and Light fought each other, and both Jade and Stone were destroyed. Jun Mo's death was not because of Qin Hao, but because of the deer that they were chasing. In other words, it was because of Jun Mo who killed himself. Especially after 10,000 years had passed, Jun Mo still hadn't let go of the elk. He had repeatedly chased after that kid from the Senior Pillmaster's clan. This was the result of his inner demons. Otherwise, how could he have died? Tian Zhao understood, but seeing through it was one thing and dealing with it was another. Jun Mo's death, he couldn't just laugh it off, could he? Heirs are really a burden to the celestial Tao. Tian Zhao grabbed the wine bowl and took another gulp. He could let go of Jun Mo. Although it was difficult to nurture a Tao spirit, he was a divine king, and there was nothing he couldn't let go of. The reason why he didn't let go was not because of Jun Mo, but because of Qin Hao's evil power that could even distort the bloodline of a divine king. If he didn't act now, what would happen when Qin Hao grew stronger? With his evil power, would Qin Hao let him go? Qing Hua, you can see through karma and the fate of all living beings. Is it because of this that you happen to pass by? The Tao was the foundation of Qing Hua Mountain's cultivation, but Tian Zhao didn't believe that Qing Hua would act for the sake of nature. The innate deity kings were born in the chaos. Each of them had a unique mark on them, like the sword, like the light, like the underworld. And Qing Hua's mark was his life. He could see through the Tao of all living beings, the cycle of life and death, and possessed a pair of omniscient eyes. Qing Hua's battle prowess was not strong, but this pair of omniscient eyes was feared by many deity kings. Otherwise, he would not have been able to survive so many trials and tribulations, living from the era of the ancient deities until now. Tian Zhao suspected that Qing Hua might have seen something on Qin Hao, which was why she happened to pass by and attacked him. But Tian Zhao couldn't see it. The era of the ancient gods is now stable. No matter what you see, I won't allow it to be destroyed. Pong! With the last gulp of wine, Tian Zhao smashed the wine bowl on the table. Ancient Nether Realm. Qin Hao couldn't describe God Ancestor Qing Hua's means, but there was only one word to describe it: fast. Fast to the extreme, so fast that it couldn't be explained or measured with common sense. In the blink of an eye, they arrived in the ancient nether realm, enveloped in azure light. With such speed, even Shura had to travel a long distance to reach the sword world. Qin Hao could at least capture some images of the celestial realms with his psyche. But in the hands of an innate deity king, it only took one breath. One breath, one heaven, and one earth. We're here. God ancestor Qing Hua waved his Tao dust, and, as the green light faded away, a gray world appeared in front of them. Looking around at the boundless Urwilds, Yang Qi saw nothing but ruins and desolation. The god worlds he saw didn't have the slightest bit of spirit light. They were just gloomy yellow and white, and looked very old. Below them was darkness. If it weren't for the fact that they could sense the realm power, Lu Qiu and Long Mian would have thought that it was just an empty space. In the distance, there was also a very faintly discernible mass of qi that was faintly discernible. From the faintly discernible mass of qi, one could also sense the existence of world energy. Lu Qiu guessed that it should be the Yumo divine world. Inside the yellowish light was the Yellow Springs realm. Inside the pale white light was the horrifying Ghost Domain. If you can follow us, I don't mind you coming to Shura Mountain for tea. Shura placed his hands behind his back and said coldly to God Ancestor Qing Hua. God Ancestor Qing Hua looked down, and in the middle of his hair, on the branch, there was a green leaf that swayed gently. Immediately, a cloud of realm power appeared under God Ancestor Qing Hua's feet like a dark fog. The Slaughter Celestial Realm. A sword cultivator lowered his head and looked at the fog that looked like a beast crawling around in fear. Let me try. God Ancestor Qing Hua's face turned serious. He formed a seal with one hand, and a ray of light flew out from the seal and flowed onto the dust Tao. The leaves above his head swayed, and a layer of boundless primordial spirit spread out and enveloped God Ancestor Qing Hua's body. He lifted the dust Tao and threw it at his feet. Swish! The green divine light swept out like a green ribbon and broke a gap in the dark fog. But then, a ferocious skull appeared in the gap. It opened its mouth and spat out a cloud of turbid air toward the green divine light. The word nether appeared in the turbid air. Buzz! God Ancestor Qing Hua's hair fluttered in the wind. He stepped back a foot and shook his head with a wry smile. Forget it, I won't go in. Nether incantation. And it was a death incantation. It was not that they could not go in, but it was too expensive to go in and have a cup of tea. After weighing the pros and cons, God Ancestor Qing Hua decided not to go in. After all, the tea of Green Mountain was good, especially the tea of Small Green Peak. This, Li Guangxing and the others looked at each other. Ancestor Qing Hua was scared. Not long ago, God Ancestor Qing Hua retreated. Why did the dignified God King Tian Zhao suddenly change his style? He did not even have the courage to go in and have a cup of tea. It seems that Senior God of Hell's curse is really vicious. Qin Hao felt embarrassed for God Ancestor Qing Hua. How can it not be vicious? That bastard put a death curse on me. God Ancestor Qing Hua snorted, showing that he was very angry. God of Hell was dead, but he did not even give him a chance to go in and have a cup of tea. How petty! However, considering the battle between light and hell, God of Hell had no choice but to do this. Death curse. Azura's face changed. Now that Qing Hua pointed it out, he finally understood what kind of curse his father had put on him. In the past, Azura did not think highly of the nether curse that protected the four realms. After all, it was a curse cast by God of Hell when he died. But when Qing Hua said the word death curse, Azura's heart trembled violently, as if he had been hit by a sledgehammer. Sadness appeared on his face. The death curse was the most powerful curse of the Nether Tao. It would only take effect after the caster died. It could be seen how the Lord of the Abyss felt at that time. Perhaps before the war between the two god realms, he already had the idea of perishing together with the Ancient Light King. Chapter 2252. Didn't you come to the ghost realm and threaten my second brother? Shura knew some of Mount Qing Hua's techniques, and compared to the other innate deity kings, Qing Hua's techniques were unique as he could project his will through the realm. That's different. Ancestor god Qing Hua shook his head. During the ghost realm's chaos, he sent a messenger from Mount Qing Hua and used the messenger's body to project a projection into the realm. The projection didn't contain any deity king's will, and thus, the dark incantation didn't work. He couldn't just send a disciple into the slaughter realm with Shura and use the disciple's body to project a projection. Thus, the tea would be consumed by the disciple, and he wouldn't even be able to taste it. Then I won't be seeing you off. Shura raised his hand and made a leave gesture. Wait, Qin Hao said hurriedly. He looked at god ancestor Qing Hua and asked, Senior ancestor, was my martial god lured from the sword realm to Mount Qing Hua by your disciples? And where did the owner of Small Green Peak come from? After hearing from Luo Yi that the martial lord had been saved by a group of immortals from Qinghua Mountain, Qin Hao's guess was very similar to the truth. However, Qin Hao still did not dare to confirm that the owner of the small Emerald Peak was one of the primordial spirit gods of the divine wilderness. Ancestor god Qing Hua nodded seriously. Just like you, my little disciple also came from somewhere. Senior ancestor. Qin Hao's heart thumped, but ancestor god Qing Hua didn't give him a chance to continue and interrupted him. Yinming has found his own Tao, and he will become the master of Mount Qing Hua in the future. This is where he belongs. As for you, you have yet to find your true home. The past is the past, and the true Tao is where you belong. Yinming has nothing to do with his past. Do you understand what I'm saying? Senior ancestor. Qin Hao's eyes flashed, and he looked at ancestor god Qing Hua with mixed feelings. What Qing Hua said was not hard to understand. Yinming was the same as Wuk. He had established his own great Tao and had a place for his great Tao. The sword world belonged to Wuk, while Yinming belonged to Qinghua Mountain. Everything that happened in the past was just a journey to find a home. The sword world was the scenery of Qin Hao's journey. It wasn't called belonging. Yinming, Wuk, and Qin Hao were in different situations. The former had gone through hardships, cultivation, and life and death, all for the sake of reaching the place where they belonged. To put it bluntly, Wuk and Yinming were no longer gods of the divine wilderness. They had their own Tao. Junior understands. Qin Hao lowered his head with a heavy heart. Qinghua Mountain stand aloof from worldly affairs and will not get involved in any war in the divine world. That was the case in the past, and will be the case in the future. Therefore, I hope Yinming can concentrate on cultivation and comprehend the essence of nature. Boy, can you understand my painstaking efforts? God ancestor Qing Hua patted Qin Hao's shoulder, implying something. Who? Qin Hao heaved a sigh of relief. The great void cauldron was left behind by Yinming. Without the drop of demonic blood in the cauldron, there would be no Qin Hao today. Qin Hao had always been grateful to Yinming and hoped that when he achieved the great Tao, he could personally thank him. But if he appeared, it would bring trouble to Yinming and drag him into the divine war. That was not what Qin Hao wanted. That was what God ancestor Qing Hua meant. He hoped that Qin Hao would not disturb Yinming. The matters of the past should have been severed long ago. I won't let Yinming or Qinghua Mountain get involved. However, if one day peace is disturbed and I'm lucky enough to survive, can I go to Qinghua Mountain to visit the owner of Little Jade Peak? Qin Hao's state of mind was clear, and he was relieved. You and Yinming are old friends, so Qinghua Mountain will naturally welcome you. Besides, you're a creature of the Archean world. I believe that day will come. When the time comes, I'll prepare tea and vegetarian food in Qinghua Palace. God ancestor Qing Hua smiled and glanced at Azura. Oh, you can come if you want. I don't have time. Azura pulled a long face and took a step forward, disappearing into the black fog light below. Divine son of the underworld, you're so rude. God ancestor Qing Hua drew a circle in the direction where Azura had disappeared and was about to leave the ancient nether realm. But then he turned to Qin Hao and said solemnly, Boy, since the beginning of the chaos, the untainted land has experienced too many disasters. It can't do without the support of the immortal king. I hope you can promise me one thing. Ancestor, please say it, Qin Hao said directly. If one day you reach the consummation realm and find your true home, remember to leave Tian Zhao's life. After saying that, God Ancestor Qing Hua let out a long sigh. Then, with a sweep of his dust of Tao, he turned into a beam of light and disappeared into the vast universe. Creak! Qin Hao clenched his fists. When he thought of how he had been stripped of his bones and his soul, and how he had been banished from the primeval realm along with Zhang Wu, they had drifted away from the primeval realm, alone and without anyone to depend on. Zhang Wu had suffered far too many grievances, as well as the hatred he felt for the destruction of the seamless divine domain. Leave Tian Zhao's life? If not for Tian Zhao's immortal general and divine soldier, he would not have ended up like this today. Junior 3, Ancestor thinks highly of you. Lucio understood the deeper meaning of God Ancestor Qing Hua's words. It seemed that once Qin Hao found his home, he would become extremely powerful. At least, he would be able to threaten the immortal king. Let's go back to the slaughter world. Qin Hao held Vivian's hand tightly. Under his divine thought, the black fog surrounding the realm light opened a passage, and they went into the inner world. Azura foam. When Qin Hao and the others landed, Mo2 was already standing on the Azura Phone dojo. Looking at the sword cultivators of the sword realm who followed Qin Hao, Mo2 instinctively showed a touch of resistance. However, Azura had told him in advance that he could not drive Lu Qiu, Long Miao, and the others away. You take the people of the sword realm and live in my palace. The divine region will send people to build a sword field outside the peak. Then you can bring them all into the sword field. In addition, Mo2 glanced at Lu Qiu and the others and said with a slight warning, Azura Phone is not safe. If there is nothing important, you'd better not walk around casually. After saying this, Mo2 turned and went directly to the Azura Palace. He had to ask why the immortal king, who had always rejected the other divine realms, was so kind to let a group of sword cultivators in. The slaughter world did not welcome the cultivators from other divine realms. Great God Azura's subordinates are truly cold. Li Guangxing smiled bitterly. The repulsion emitted from Mo2 was very strong. It seemed that not everyone could set foot in the slaughter world. The other people of the sword realm also smiled bitterly. Under the gloomy way of heaven, the cold and desolate aura between heaven and earth made them very uncomfortable. However, since they were here, they had to endure and stay no matter how unwelcome Azura's subordinates were. That is Immortal General Mo2's day. He has 8 immortal grade meridians. The power of his slaughter spear way is extremely shocking. He once fought alone and did not retreat in the slightest. Don't be frightened by his fierceness. Brother Mo2 is actually very kind. Qin Hao smiled and explained to the others. He remembered that when Qin Hao first arrived at Azura Foam, Mo2 was afraid that Qin Hao would be at a disadvantage because of the godly weapon. He immediately threw his blood spear into the dojo and gave it to Qin Hao after that. What a generous and considerate immortal general this was. Unfortunately, Qin Hao did not understand that Mo2's generosity was only for the creatures of the slaughter world. To other cultivators of the god realm, he would only kill them with one stab. Then, Qin Hao led the others to Mo2 Palace and settled them down one by one. He also reminded Lu Qiu and the others not to run around Azura Phone. Mo2's warning was not a threat. Azura Phone was indeed not safe. There were blood pools everywhere, and black-robed divine guard could emerge from the ground at any time. Now, the Ghost Domain Ghost General, the Underworld Bone General, the Ghost Demon Soul General, and many other powerful immortal generals of the 4 realms were living on the peak. It was easy to get into trouble if they were not careful. In fact, even without Qin Hao's reminder, Lu Qiu and the others did not dare to run around. The slaughter world's way of heaven contained a strong, murderous intent. In such an environment, swordsmen could easily lose his nature. If they had the time to run around, it was better to calm down and stabilize their minds. Wu, you guys stay here first. The small courtyard next door is mine. Call me if you need anything. Qin Hao arranged for Zhang Wu, Alu, Heaven Do, and the four immortal generals to stay together. Then, he took Vivian's hand and prepared to leave. When he walked out the door, he was stunned. Seeing Kuang Tang squatting on the ground, Qin Hao smiled bitterly. Why don't you stay with Lu Qiu and the others? Kuang Tang had followed Ziyin to the sword world. Now that Xiao Han was not here, he was unwilling to stay with the swordsman. He raised his head unhappily and said to Qin Hao in a low, muffled voice, I have to follow you. Sister Muri is by your side. Kuang Tang could sense Muri's divine soul from Qin Hao's divine will. His phoenix bloodline had reacted. Let him stay by my side. Tang, don't disturb Qin Hao, Zhang Wu said. I won't. Kuang Tang suddenly stood up and roared. He still hadn't forgotten the battle at the Sunset Peak. At that time, he was the Sunset Battle God's opponent. If he stayed by Zhang Wu's side, what if he was killed? Qin Hao was at his wit's end. He couldn't beat him or scold him. Kuang Tang's innate spiritual sense was damaged. His thoughts were too simple. Tang, follow the Sunset Battle God and the others. Be good. Muri's soul floated out from Qin Hao's shoulder. Sister. Kuang Tang stretched out his rough hand. He was afraid that he would hurt Muri's soul, so he quickly retracted his hand. He nodded blankly. Yes, Tang will listen to sister. Little Tang is the best. Muri smiled. Her soul returned to Qin Hao's shoulder. Master, what about me? You can't throw me together with Yufeng and the other men. Qin Yue frowned. She was the only girl among the four divine generals. We've cultivated together for over 1,000 years. We've been through life and death together. How could you not know what's on each of us? Why are you so calculative? Come. Yufeng waved at Qin Yue with shifty eyes. Scram. Qin Yue frowned and cursed. Qin Yue, stay with me and Hao. Vivian smiled. She didn't forget to look at Qin Hao for his opinion. Qin Hao shrugged. It wasn't too crowded for the three of them to stay in his courtyard. However, he wanted to be alone with Vivian. They could talk in private and get rid of the hundreds of years of lovesickness. Sister Vivian is the best. Qin Yue happily held Mu Yue's arm. Wei Wei glanced at Qin Hao. Seeing him nod, she reluctantly left. Wei Wei is deeply infatuated with you. I really envy your good fortune. Zhang Wu's expression still did not change, but everyone could feel the meaning behind his words. He was congratulating Qin Hao from the bottom of his heart. Wei Wei had waited bitterly for Qin Hao for 600 years. Finally, they had become a couple. Not only her, but Xiao Han was also the same for Qin Hao. Actually, I also envy you. You have a good brother like me who can go through life and death with you. Qin Hao rubbed his nose and said with a smile, but then again, you are not young anymore. It's time to start a family. Previously, there was Caiogua, Yishuehan, Qin Yun, and others. Now, Wuk was also married. Speaking of Wuk's marriage, Qin Hao had encouraged him. He thought that if there was a chance, he should find a girl for Zhang Wu so that he would not follow him all day. Zhang Wu suddenly lowered his head. Start a family? But he was already a person without feelings. Even if the most beautiful girl in the world was in front of him, he would not be moved at all. What's there to be shy about? I'm telling the truth, Qin Hao said with a smile. If they had not been expelled from the Archean world, the young city lord of War God City would have already started a family. Zhang Lang, you take Yufeng and Qin Cheng to cultivate here. Qin Hao and I will go out for a walk. Zhang Wu said. Okay. Zhang Lang nodded. It was not necessary to enter the reincarnation dojo to cultivate. Let's go. Zhang Wu looked at Qin Hao and took the initiative to walk out of the town. Qin Hao followed silently. They had indeed not talked for a long time. How much of your memory have you recovered? After leaving the town and stepping on the scorched earth of the massacred divine realm, Zhang Wu and Qin Hao walked side by side under the dim sky. They were like two people who had been abandoned by the world. I've remembered everything that should be remembered, Qin Hao said. As his cultivation deepened, his soul became more stable, and his celestial source became stronger. Those fragmented memories of the past had long been connected together. What are your plans? Zhang Wu asked. Qin Hao stopped walking. Cultivation, what else can I plan? You know that's not what I'm asking. Taoist Qing Hua has the ability to see through the reincarnation of the divine Tao. The past, the future, the calamities, and the Fuji. Every word of his contains great mysteries, and he can predict the changes in the untainted land. Moreover, this old thing never talks empty words. Zhang Wu still remembered Qing Hua's solemn warning to Qin Hao before he left. When he completed his Tao and found his home, he hoped that Qin Hao would spare Tian Zhao's life. This was extremely profound. With Qin Hua's skills and character, and the solemn expression he had when he left, it was obvious that he was not joking. Who can defeat me? Who can defeat me? Kuang Tang's entire body was wreaking havoc. He clenched his fists and roared towards the sky. His bloodshot eyes seemed to have entered a berserk state. He felt that there was nothing he couldn't do. Bang! Just as he raised his head, a large foot came down from the sky and stomped on his face. This foot was extremely heavy. It had directly shattered the heaven wheel around Kuang Tang's body. A trembling force came, and Kuang Tang's head buzzed. His eyes rolled back, and he fell down unconscious. After Qin Hao kicked Kuang Tang unconscious, his body turned into a string of afterimages and returned to the side of the four divine masters. You're rebelling against the heavens. He just forged his heaven wheel. So this kick was a bit too heavy, said Shura. Qin Hao scratched his head and chuckled. It was good that it was a bit heavy. It would prevent Kuang Tang from being too arrogant and challenging the upper realm in the future. If that happened, he wouldn't even know how he died. Moreover, if he didn't kick him unconscious, this Kuang Tang wouldn't stop. It's been 400 years. With your current cultivation, you can definitely help Lu Qiu reforge his sword soul. Don't delay anymore. Shura felt the fluctuations of divine intent from Qin Hao's body. The moment he kicked, there was a faint shadow of the seventh divine vein in the heaven wheel. His cultivation was enough. Actually, I want to wait until the seventh divine vein is completely formed before helping Lu Qiu reforge his sword soul. Qin Hao still had the shadow of failing 51 reincarnations in his heart. He didn't dare to rashly try it on Lu Qiu. I said that reforging a sword soul is different from reincarnation. Perhaps it will consume a lot of your divine power, but even if you fail, nothing will happen to you. Just do it, encouraged Shura. Even if he failed, Lu Qiu's sword soul would still not appear. Kid, don't think too much. The more apprehensions you have, the more restrained you will be. Awakening a sword soul is easy, but the path of reincarnation requires the creation of its spirituality. Think back to your first reincarnation. At that time, you were the closest to the true essence of the Tao of filth, said Yellow Springs. Qin Hao stood in place and thought carefully for a moment. Then he bowed to the four of them. Thank you, teachers, for your teachings. This disciple will remember. With a step, Qin Hao flew off the peak and landed in the small town in the distance. It had been 400 years. It was time for him to reforge Lu Qiu's sword soul and help him wield the glazed, translucent sword again. Fourth brother, have you ever thought that the filth earth that kid has is actually different from father's filth earth? Yellow Springs asked Shura. Shura was silent for a long time. Then he said, I'm not sure. Maybe big brother is right. After failing 51 reincarnations, Qin Hao tried all kinds of methods.